Okay.
There you are. It's on.
All right, and there doesn't. I still don't seem to be able to mute. Let me just. It's not letting me mute.
Well, you're live, so.
Yeah, well, all right. So I'm going to just copy this and then close this. That way we won't have muting problems. Okay, so hello. Here we are. We're going to do chapter 3 today of Silverman's Fighting God, and I thought maybe we could kind of start. Let me pull this up. I like to talk about his. He always has 2 quotes at the beginning, and to me they frame the chapter, right? So his 2 quotes. The one almost always is some email that he received from American Atheists, and then the second quote is something that kind of touches on that email plus kind of frames what's going to happen in the chapter. So his first quote is from an email that he got, and it involves words like, David Silverman, that un-American piece of shit, faggot-loving son of a rotten cunt, needs to move to another country. He obviously has no love for America and its values. I'm going to continue to tell you people what parasitic garbage you are. Have a Merry Christmas, and Christ is in all caps of Christmas, you bunch of douchebags. Okay? And then following that is a quote from Dawkins, which says, when I meet somebody who claims to be religious, my first impulse is, I don't believe you. I don't believe you until you tell me that you really believe. For example, if they say they're Catholic, do you really believe that when a priest blesses a wafer, it turns into the body of Christ? Are you seriously telling me that you believe that? Are you seriously saying that wine turns into blood? Mock them, ridicule them. In public, don't fall for the convention that we're all too polite to talk about religion. Religion is not off of the table. Religion is not off limits. And that's from Dawkins. So in this first quote, it seems like he wants to point to the problems that America has in how we have managed to mingle government with Christianity despite our Constitution. And in the second Dawkins quote, he kind of is talking about sort of the firebrand response.
Yeah.
And that to me, go ahead. Go on.
It's funny that you're sitting in here talking about American politics with 2 Canadians, but we'll deal with that as we go.
Listen, you guys are more knowledgeable than any American.
I think when Dawkins starts talking like this is why he gets lambasted a lot. He's the same type of person that Mr. Silverman is, and he's very outspoken in his criticism of religion in general. And so when he says things like this, he's trying to get a reaction from people. And I think that's the point Silverman's trying to make when he uses a quote like this. Like, do you really believe that? And I know many Catholics who don't. They don't believe. That's called the transubstantiation. And they don't actually believe it, but it's part of their religion. It's just what they do. They do that every Sunday and sometimes in the middle of the week. But they don't really believe that that's the body and blood of Christ. They should. They're supposed to.
Well, it seems as though they are supposed to, doesn't it?
Yes. They are supposed to. And they're also... Go ahead, Oz.
I was going to say, well, one of the reasons that Dawkins gets into trouble here for saying that kind of thing is I don't think he understands what transubstantiation is. I mean, they had this weird idea. I mean, try to imagine when people said that the bread and the wine literally turns into the body and the blood of Christ. I mean, did they actually think that they were going to taste blood and that they would be eating meat, human meat? I mean, clearly everybody who partook of the Eucharistic ritual knew that the communion wafer tasted like a communion wafer should, and it didn't taste like a piece of human meat, and that the wine didn't taste anything like blood. So what were they thinking? They couldn't have been thinking what the average person thinks it must mean, right? And Dawkins, I don't know if he knows what transubstantiation is, but I think he's playing on the public's ignorance of what that doctrine is. And look how ridiculous this is. But no one has ever believed that it was going to be that way. When they say that they believe that these 2 things, the holy wafer and the wine turn into the body and blood of Christ, literally, what they have a very different idea, a different theory, a different metaphysical theory about substances the way it was viewed in antiquity, it's just an old sort of Aristotelian idea, is that things had an essence, an essential property, and then all of the ordinary properties that we see, like the taste of something and the look of something and the feel of it and stuff like that, everything that was evident to the senses, those were what were called the accidents. Those were incidental features. They could come and go. So God could make blood look like a brick and be as hard as a brick, and he could make the body of Christ look and taste like a cactus, and it would still be the body of Christ. Or he could make it look like a communion wafer. So the idea was God took this communion wafer, literally turned the substance of the communion wafer into the body of Christ, but all of the outward appearances and manifestations of it remained exactly like it was a communion wafer. Right? So that's the idea, is that the accidents, the incidental properties, the ones that we can actually experience, are exactly the same, which is why it didn't strike any Catholic at any point as odd. Well, that's funny. This doesn't taste like blood. This doesn't taste like meat. It tastes like a communion wafer, right? That's why it never struck them as odd, because they didn't think of it as we do. But when Dawkins tries to ridicule it in this way, he's ridiculing them for not believing something that no Catholic, informed or otherwise, has ever believed. That's the problem. He's either deliberately or accidentally strawmanning this particular article of faith. Now, I agree, it's a ridiculous article of faith, but this is a ridiculous. Hang on, but this is a ridiculous article of faith that people believed about everything. They believed that this glass of scotch, incidentally, tastes peaty, right?
Just by accident.
Yeah, well, no, but not by accident. What they called the accidents were the incidental features of something.
Right.
They're not the essential features.
That's not. So what? So okay. So everything has an essential feature.
That's what was thought in antiquity. Yeah.
Let me read what the Catholic Dictionary says. It says the complete change of the substance of bread and wine into the substance of Christ, body and blood, by an ordained priest, that keeps the essence of the bread and the wine. That's what you taste, but it is actually turned into the substance of Christ's body and blood. So it's not physically the body and blood of Christ.
No, it is. It is.
But it tastes like wine, bread and wine, not blood and meat. That's what you're saying.
Well, it's because they thought that substance was something that exhibited incidental properties and features, but the incidental features were features of the substance, and the substance, who knows what the substance is, but it was different from one thing to the next. So that's what they thought. But this wasn't just some weird Catholic doctrine. This was a medieval doctrine, right? That people believed about everything.
Right.
Everything physical had a substance, and it had accidental or incidental properties. And so they thought that God was just sort of monkeying around with the incidental and accidental properties of the Eucharistic host and the wine. That's what they thought. So it's a bizarre doctrine, but it's a bizarre doctrine that anybody, Catholic or not, would have believed in antiquity and in the Middle Ages. So, and I agree, it's a ridiculous notion today. No one should believe this. This is a ridiculous, preposterous view of matter and substance and properties to hold, given what we know about physics today. It doesn't make any sense.
No.
But even if we grant that view, it still seems odd to me. What is the advantage? I mean, what is holy about consuming those substances?
Well,
I don't.
Well, it's become part. Well, Jesus said, "Take, eat. This is my body. Take, drink. This is my blood." So the church were built on some of these things that they thought Jesus did. This communion thing was part of the ritual, and it became
for a modern,
part of the
stupid American.
Yeah.
It seems like here, do some cannibalism.
Well,
right?
That's what people thought. That's what the Protestants actually. That was one of their arguments when they split up. Well, you guys, basically, believe in cannibalism.
Yeah, but obviously that's not what they're doing, right? They're clearly not.
There was that essence. People did actually believe they were consuming Christ. Weird, but some people believe that.
Well, no, it's called communion. It's a communion. This Eucharistic, this is how you commune. You literally come into physical contact, physical and spiritual contact, right? You are literally communicating with Christ through this
Exactly.
ritual. This is the way you're right. He is the bread of life, right? Um,
I don't understand. What does that
well,
mean?
look, who knows when he says, I am the doorway and I am the bread of life and I am the shepherd. These are all metaphors.
Well, doorway's pretty easy, but bread of life.
Well, the bread of life was
what sustains you, keeps you. What's going to guarantee your continued existence, right?
the bread of life was also a reference to the manna that the Israelites were supposedly eating in the desert for 40 years. So that was bread from heaven.
Oh,
so
man.
that's a correlation that's one of the reasons why they think they put that phrase in there. I'm a mythicist, so I don't believe any of it happened. So I can give you lots of reasons where I think the imagery comes from, but we're not going to get into that today.
All right, but let's go back to Dawkins now, right? Can we rescue Dawkins? So let's assume that Dawkins does understand what Ozzy explained, which I doubt, and I also doubt I think very few people understand what Ozzy just said.
Yeah.
Even believers. But even if so, can Dawkins' statement still stand, even given the what Ozzy just explained? To me, it seems like it still stands.
No, it still stands.
Yeah.
It still stands because look, if the average Catholic doesn't know this weird metaphysical theory about substances and accidents, then they have to construe what they're doing as a mere symbolic act, when their doctrine says it's not symbolic, which means they don't actually subscribe to the doctrine that they're supposed to be subscribing to. So he's able to say, you don't really believe this.
That's right.
You're believing something other. You don't understand your Catholicism enough to realize how ridiculous it is. Yet you're believing something that seems milder, and it's just this just represents the body, and this just represents the blood of Christ. But it's not actually this thing, right? In which case, they're not, in fact, understanding their own dogma. They don't sincerely believe what the church is teaching. They're believing something else. So
they're believing a straw man about their own religion.
Sort of, yeah. But what I think is making sense is he could say, look, you're not taking your religion seriously enough here. Even if you construe this symbolically, what the heck is the point then of this symbolism? This is okay.
Right.
Okay, so it's not really a kind of cannibalism. It's just a symbolic form of cannibalism.
Right.
How the heck is that any better?
Right.
Yeah, I mean, why is cannibalism good?
Well, why is it bad? Ask the guys who survived in the Himalaya and the Andes when their plane crashed.
Well, sure, that's an example.
But why is it a sacrament? Why? I mean, we understand if you're starving to death, why you should eat.
Why is it a holy?
Yeah, that's a different thing. That's a clearly different thing. Right. But so Ozzy, you were saying, why is it a sacrament? So go on. I don't understand why. What is sacred about this?
It's sacred because it's like this one ritual, this one commandment that Jesus is supposed to sort of have given to his disciples. Do this in remembrance of me, and then everyone is supposed to do this thing, right? And this is the way that you commune with Christ. This is supposed to be the method to commune with Him. Not through, you don't have personal revelations. You don't have visions of Jesus and stuff. This is not the way that Christians have sort of expected to commune with Jesus traditionally through the Catholic Church. This is how you do it. It's through the Mass and this communion ritual, this Eucharistic ritual. This is how you commune with Him. But I think, Dawkins is right to say, listen, you believe things that are absolutely preposterous. So preposterous are these doctrines that you have to construe them symbolically, and symbolically they make even less sense.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It makes even less sense as symbolism.
Right.
I often am puzzled. Like, I like to take people at their word when they say that they believe things, even preposterous things. But sometimes you have to wonder. Wait a minute. If you look at how people behave, you can often tell that no, you're just professing to believe something. When people say, "I believe that God is watching and sees everything," then why are you doing all these terrible things that are going to get you in trouble and earn the disapproval of the God you say you love and worship and stuff like that? I mean, you wouldn't just do a smash and grab in a jewelry store front window and just grab the jewelry if there was a cop right there, right? But people who are thieves will do these things. But even a thief won't do it in front of a cop because he knows he's going to get caught. And yet every believer believes that, you know, the super cop in the sky, right? This ultimate surveillance system that even knows what you're thinking. They'll routinely sin, knowing that this being is there and seeing, and they can't escape it. They can't rationalize it or justify it because he knows their very thoughts and will see right through it. And yet they do these things. And so we're kind of left wondering, geez, how seriously do you take this doctrine that God disapproves, right? And or are you not merely just thinking what most people think, you know, which is it's not so bad, and he'll understand my reasons, and you know he'll go soft on me, you know, an exception will be made in my case or in this case or whatever, right?
This challenge that you're bringing up about, you know, could they possibly really believe all of that is something that he brings up in chapter 3, and he exactly talks about this idea. And I don't know if you all remember, but Negation of P, I believe, once talked about this with the theist, how it really, if you honestly believe that God is everywhere and that God is always, always watching you, then, you know, how do you do things in private, right? Like how do you masturbate and that kind of thing. And so it's got to be that at least some part of you doesn't really buy that. Otherwise, you know, that would be really sincerely constantly on your mind.
Well, I think the ultimate irony in all of that is that you've got a population in America that is, let's just say conservatively, 75% Christian, or some sort of a Christian belief, or even religious, add the Muslims. They're dead set against any kind of attack on their personal privacy, yet believe in a God that sees everything. Like how, like take your head and bang it around a bit. You know, you live with a belief that you're being watched every moment of every day, and yet you don't want closed circuit TV channel cameras downtown watching stores and criminals. Like really, you can't have it both ways. If God is watching everything, then you're already under the gun. You're already being watched every moment of every day. So why don't you let them stop the criminals from breaking in and hurting people or destroying property? Like, I don't see how they get around that one.
There's a couple of moves they could make. First of all, they would say, well, it's God's prerogative to see into your heart and see everything that you're doing. And in any case, he's omniscient, and it's just in his nature to be omniscient, so he can't help it anyway.
Right. No. Yeah.
So,
again,
but he's authorized, and he is morally entitled to this. He created the universe. He created you in it.
Yeah.
He brought you in. He can take you out. He can do anything he wants, including spy on you. It's not spying when he does it. It's spying on others. But I mean, who knows? If you ask them, they might say, "Well, I would prefer if God couldn't see me, but I'm not in a position to prevent the omniscient creator of the universe from knowing everything that goes on." Okay, but I am in a position to prevent you, James, from knowing everything that goes on in my private life, and because I can do something about that, and I don't want you knowing things about me because I can't trust what you would do. I trust what a holy God will do with all that knowledge. I don't trust what James would do with that knowledge about what goes on in my thoughts and in my private life, right? So it seems to me that they could make a good principled argument for why they're not troubled in one case and troubled in the other. What I find odd is you wouldn't masturbate in front of your parents or your in-laws or your children, but you'll masturbate in front of God, who you think disapproves of that kind of thing.
That's the part that makes me doubt, and that's the part that makes me wonder how much belief do they really have?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that really is professing to believe. I think in their heart of hearts, what most people believe is, yes, God is watching, but because he knows everyone does it, he gives everybody a pass on this. It's just a human weakness, and he's a merciful God, and he's an understanding and a compassionate God. He's not going to beat me up because I decide to pleasure myself. I think that's how they think.
Well, it's not actually.
Certainly, that's how I thought. I thought
it's not actually.
It would be okay.
People who used to be religious and were still religious during adolescence, let's just say, right? So how, what happened in your head?
Well, I felt guilty. I mean, I was a teenager who used to be very, very concerned about the fact that that God could see me, masturbating when I was like 14 years old, right? And I couldn't help but think about girls, and I was just, was going through puberty. I was just driven mad with lust and curious about what was going on under girls' dresses all the time, I simply
There's nothing going on there.
Use the word hormones and not lust. Lust is a biblical word.
And lust is a feeling.
People
feel lust. It's real. It's real. And I use the word lust without any,
religious overtones.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, lust is good and healthy. Yeah. It's like anger. There are times when you should be angry. It's not a negative emotion. Lust. Lust comes in handy, like when you want to have children. I was sort of, beleaguered. I was tormented by the fact that I thought the creator of the universe could see what was going on and could see that I wanted to play with myself as a teenager, and that he knew what was going on when I did, and then I would feel terribly guilty afterwards. It was awful, and I couldn't turn it off. I mean, but I was able to sort of rationalize it as, well, listen, I'm surely not alone. And these impulses were so strong as to be all but irresistible. And they were relentless. It's like being hungry, right? You can just say, well, I'm not going to eat right now. Yes, but the hunger doesn't go away. It just gets worse and worse. And so that's what I went through. I just imagined that, he'll give me a pass. He'll forgive this. He'll understand. Why? Because he knows what's going on. He knows how tortured I am. Right? So that's how I thought. And I think that's how most people think about these kinds of things when they they tell lies that they shouldn't tell, or maybe they cheat on their taxes, or do something morally problematical.
Plus, all you have to do is repent, and God forgives you. So it doesn't matter.
I just try to imagine, like, you've got your magazine or whatever. I don't know how guys do it, but if you're religious,
yeah, magazines is how it was done. Yeah.
So you're all set up, right, to do your masturbating, and then do you then go, okay, God, here we go. Don't forget that I'm human, and I know you're watching me, but what can I say? And then you open the magazine. Or I think more it's like you have your moment, and during that moment you're not thinking about the fact that God is there, and then later is when that sort of hits you.
It intruded often enough as to sort of spoil one's ability to proceed.
That's just so sad.
Well, it is sad. I mean, it was terrible. I mean, I tormented myself over nothing.
Yep.
Wow,
nothing.
Masturbation, like, it's such a nothing. I mean, talk about a victimless crime. Like, oh, my goodness, there's no victim. There was just a beneficiary. I felt better and relieved and untormented sexually afterwards, right? I mean, it's a good and normal and healthy thing, right? It should not have been sort of, damned. But anyway, that's the way I dealt with it. But I imagined that I would get a pass. And I did do some of the compartmentalizing that you're talking about, Helena. But there were plenty of times where the guilts would just overcome me, and I would just say, I need to stop, And I can remember, like, long stretches of trying not to masturbate, right? Just, I'm not going to do this. It's wrong, and you'd hold out as long as you could until you're sort of driven mad with lust, It's kind of tragic and pathetic to talk about it, but it's true. And, like, this is one of the evils of this kind of religion that tells you this. This is why I think this is a liability. This is a social evil that we are well rid of. We are tormenting young people who are sort of very ill-equipped to deal with these kinds of things, right? It didn't do me any good. It didn't keep me out of any trouble. It would look, and if a girl had been available to me, if I could have made out with a girl and had sex with a girl, right, I would have, right? I mean, the only, especially like sort of being sort of so sexually repressed, it only made it worse. I was more fixated and more obsessive about it than I otherwise would have been. The only reason I resorted to masturbation as opposed to having sex with girls is you couldn't find a girl who was willing. I would have, like any other teenage boy.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
All right, so give me just a second. I'm going to try to pull up my little sort of outline and see where we go from here. Just give me 1 second here. Okay, so he starts chapter 3 after giving those 2 quotes with a little introduction. And I think the theme of the introduction is sort of there is absolutely no proof, and there never has been, for anything supernatural, much less God's, but let's just, keep it to God's. And he puts out his little bet, right? So he says, never once in the history of our species has any religion found, offered, or shown any verifiable and testable proof based on scientifically valid evidence in the scientific method, parentheses, the way we would prove anything, close parentheses, of any supernatural being or phenomenon ever. That's on page 46 to 47. And then he gives his bet, which is, if any theist can produce scientific evidence, I will renounce everything, right? And I'll do it publicly and loud, etc. So I think that he, first of all, is he equivocating about proof, etc., etc. I think that might be.
I think that's why it's in italics. I don't think.
Sorry, what did you say?
I think he understands that proof is not a science thing; it's a math thing.
You're looking for evidence.
Yeah. He's using prove in the colloquial sense that show me more than this is a scientific proof.
And how does he define supernatural? That's the first question that I can think of.
So I looked for a definition of supernatural from him, and I didn't find one. I think he's not so concerned with defining supernatural, right? He really wants to throw this to people that there's no actual evidence for any of the gods that you propose, right? And he's trying to say that at least if you're going to be a firebrand atheist, that is something that you should always be doing, is constantly saying, you have no proof, you have no proof, you have no proof. Do we care that he's saying proof? I mean, he's not a philosopher. Does it matter? Let's talk about that for a second while I look at where he goes next.
That matters to me because I think that confuses people all the time. When you talk about proof instead of evidence or justification, people wet themselves. Can you prove that? Well, no, I can't prove something. But I can't prove that my car is in my driveway. Not right now. There are things I could do in principle, maybe that I could do it. But I can't prove that there are eggs in Brazil right now. I have excellent reasons for thinking that somewhere in Brazil there are eggs. Okay, but I can't prove it. Right? I'd have to go to Brazil, and that's not going to happen anytime soon.
Why don't you just have somebody? Why don't you just have somebody turn on their webcam and show you pictures of eggs?
Well, that's Brazil. If I have a webcam, right? Okay, it's 100 years ago. 100 years ago, I could have been saying that, and I'd have this problem, right? I could choose something else that I couldn't prove, that I have every reason to believe. Like the problem with proof is that it sets the bar extremely high, and so when people use the word proof instead of justification or warranted belief or evidence, things like that, then people think, oh, okay, well, I've got to be, agnostic about everything. Well, no. You don't have to be agnostic about something just because you can't prove something one way or the other, right? We have reasons and justifications and evidence for something, right? So I think it matters because the words evidence and justification are perfectly ordinary vernacular English words. This is not the vocabulary of philosophers. Right? And we don't have to resort always to proof. When people say, prove it, I think most of the time when people say prove it, they're choosing that word. They're choosing that word because it sets the bar so high, and it becomes reflexive. It's a reflex now that people will just say, prove it. And then when you give them reasons or evidence, they go, well, that's not proof. What they mean is you haven't demonstrated conclusively that there isn't another interpretation or something like that. And I'd say, okay, well, then just piss off. Okay, if you want to know my reasons for and justification for thinking, I'm giving it, and that's what you need to address, not whether or not I can prove something. Because really, proof. If we're going to get sort of technical about proof, well, let's leave that word proof where it belongs, in the domain of math and logic and geometry and set theory and other formal domains. And then let's just not talk about scientific proof, because ain't no such thing, right? Right. So if he thinks everything has to sort of fall at the doorstep of science, if that's the court of appeal that he thinks makes for rational beliefs is scientific standards, then he ought to shut up about the word proof. Right? If by proof he's talking about something that scientists can do, then what he means is evidence, and he needs to be consistent in that.
But this goes back to what we were saying, like, what was it, chapter 1, in how he was just very unsophisticated with his language. He's very, very sloppy, and this is just another example, in my opinion.
Yeah, but is it sloppiness, or is it something done on purpose?
I think it's sloppiness.
Is he catering to his audience? Is he catering to his audience? Is that what you?
Well, I think for the majority of people who live a normal life, they have these terms mean something different than they do to philosophers and scientists. They really do. Like, I understand before I understood anything about philosophy, that when somebody would say prove it, that they wanted me to give them evidence about what I was saying. I didn't take it as a philosophical proof or they needed a math proof. I understood it to mean, show me what you're talking about. Give me something other than your word. What are you actually saying? Yeah. So I think he's just using it because 90% of the people that this book will touch will use it that way. They're not necessarily the philosophers, and they're not the scientists. They're just general Joe Blow people. Oh, I understand what that term means, and yeah, I don't see anything that supports this God claim. I think that's how people would see that as. I don't think it's demanding anything too much. I think he's trying to reach his audience.
Why doesn't he use the word evidence, which is the better and more accurate word?
Because most people don't use the term that way.
Everybody knows the word evidence. Everybody knows that word.
But it's easier to say proof, and it's shorter.
No, it's not. No. Evidence avoids all of the problems that we're worried about.
I'm not disagreeing with you, Ozzy. I'm just saying the way he's using it in this book is just, it's a low, he wants more people to understand what he's talking about. Most people know what they mean by proof.
There isn't a 6-year-old that doesn't understand the word evidence once you explain it to them, and there isn't a 10-year-old who doesn't use the word
once you explain it to them.
No, a 10-year-old. Look, there's no 6th grader who isn't familiar with the word evidence and understands what it means.
Perhaps.
Right? I mean, this idea that he's pitching this low. No.
I agree it's a sloppy use of the word. I agree with you, but to me it's not a big deal. It really isn't.
It's a big deal in a manifesto. It's a big deal in a manifesto. Here's why I think it's a big deal, because look how people use the word proof in this discourse, right? They say, prove it, and then you give them your reasons why you believe something, and they go, oh, that's not proof. But now suddenly they're not asking for evidence. Look, this is a bait and switch when people use the word proof this way. Right? And that's what I don't like about it. When people ask me for proof, and I think that they mean evidence, I give them my evidence. And then if they're not satisfied with my evidence, not because they've impugned it and shown that it's not evidence, but that it doesn't amount to a proof, then I know that they're playing a game with me, a bait and switch. They asked me for proof, and I thought they were asking me for evidence. They made it sound like they were asking for evidence. And when I supplied the evidence, they ignore my evidence and say it doesn't amount to a proof. Then I have a problem with that.
Mm-hmm.
Then I know, okay, you're just playing a game. And good.
I was just going to ask James a question, because when we use common language, when we use the word proof, would you agree that if I were to say to you, prove it to me, I think there's an implication of certainty there. That's what makes all the difference. You're looking for 100%, and that simply doesn't exist in the scientific world. So there you have your first problem. Would you agree?
Well, like I said, I don't really think people use prove in that sense.
You don't?
I really don't think that it means that much different than evidence to some people. Now, I understand what you guys are saying, that yes, we should be having clearer, more defined, better terms, especially if you want this to be the manifesto. I mean, I get all of that. But what I'm saying is that the people who are going to read this book, who aren't philosophers and who aren't scientists, they're going to read that and understand what he means. And he's even got it italicized. It's not like he doesn't know the difference. It's just he's using the word on purpose to reach his general people. I don't think he's trying
it's italicized for the opposite reason. It's italicized because if you use the word evidence, you wouldn't be italicizing it. You'd be making a different point. Oh, I'd be satisfied with evidence. What he's saying is, you can't prove there's a God. Okay, I know a lot of Christians and Jews. I can't say I know of a Muslim because I don't know that many Muslims who would say this. But I mean, I know lots of Christians and Jews who would say, "Yeah, of course I can't prove there's a God, but I can give you evidence for a God." And then they would, I don't think it's good evidence by my light, so I would challenge their evidence. But I think the reason he uses the word "prove" and then italicizes it is precisely that he is trying to set the bar extremely high. And he's not meaning to use it as the word.
The sentence before the italicized word is testable, verifiable, testable proof based on scientifically valid evidence and the scientific method.
Proof based on evidence, which is to say that he's distinguishing between proof and evidence. Right. That's the problem. Right. He wants a proof of God. And okay, well, so what? The only reason you can be a theist is if you think you can prove there's a God? Is the only reason you can be an atheist if you can prove there isn't? That's ridiculous. You don't need proof to believe something. You need evidence. You need reasons. You need justification. If you could only believe things, if you're only allowed to believe things, if you're only being rational to believe things when you could prove things, then none of us are very rational about anything 99.9% of the time, because there's very little that we can prove outside of things like math and logic and set theory and geometry. So that's the problem. It's the very bait and switch that I worry about.
I do understand that.
I know you understand.
So I'm going to just...
sure, I know.
I'm going to weigh in.
Yep.
I'm going to weigh in on Ozzy's side here. Am I screen sharing when I talk?
Yep, you're on.
Okay. So he talks. So right here is that first quote that I read, and then he gives his bet. He says that it's an example of being a firebrand, and the reason it's an example is because it will get theists angry, and they will want to take it to heart. Okay. Then he says that what that does, the effect that has, is it sort of shakes the pedestal that, at least in the United States, Christianity in particular, is on, that there's a pedestal, and that doing this, and I think that even means or includes, in terms of being a firebrand, using the word proof, right, will have this effect, right? And he then says, so I make this bet with theists, I do it all the time, it's an example of being a firebrand, and the kinds of things I get back are, proof doesn't have to be scientifically valid, and he says that's not true. Also, they say things like, I know it in my heart. How else can we explain something we don't understand? God is love. So he says doing this, saying you can't prove it, I dare you to prove it. I will become a Christian if you can prove it to me, will cause these kinds of reactions, right? But what they won't say is, oh, look, I found scientifically valid, testable proof right here for God. Now, he thinks, or at least he's saying, that what might happen as a result is that the Christians or the religious people who take him up on his bet, if they are honest with themselves, when they fail, they will be halfway to freedom. For they will know that religion is made up of lots of things, but facts aren't among them. I really doubt that. I don't think that is what's going to happen, right? But he says, ideally, they will get the message and escape religion. So he's trying to back up sort of this perhaps slimy or slippery move of using the word proof by talking about sort of all the positive consequences that might happen in society, right? And he even says, in the end, I'm only trying to help injured people recover, and in doing so, I will dramatically improve their lives, or we firebrands, by doing this. So to me, this is a an ends means kind of calculus. But it does certainly seem like he's not even saying that he's using proof honestly. It's almost like an admission that using proof dishonestly might be worth doing.
Well, there's something I could say here in defense of his objective. I mean, I agree that we should challenge people who profess to believe in gods and various theological claims. We should challenge them to provide the evidence for it. I think that is good. I think they need to confront our incredulity and our skepticism, and because a lot of people just profess to believe these things, and eventually they profess them long enough, and they hook up with other things they believe, and eventually they come to sincerely believe these things without evidence, right? And unless those beliefs get challenged, people will happily go along believing all kinds of preposterous things. So I think that it is in fact a good thing to challenge people on what they believe and insist that they back up what they believe, even if that is socially awkward sometimes, and even if it does put a strain in the conversation. I think that's good. That's Sam Harris has an expression for this. He calls it conversational pressure, right? People who believe these preposterous things, as we see them, should be made to feel the weight of our incredulity, and that they should fall under that kind of conversational pressure. You don't have to hector people and insult them or anything like that. But it seems to me that you can do that without playing a bait-and-switch game with the words proof and evidence. You can just say, what's your evidence? And then when they give you their evidence, you can say, well, here's why I don't think that's good evidence. As opposed to say, that's not a proof. Well, the person's probably going to say, well, I didn't say it was a proof. I said it was evidence. When you asked me for proof, I presumed that since you're asking me about a controversial claim that I realize not everyone agrees to and isn't scientifically verifiable, that you're asking me for my reasons and the evidence that justifies my belief. I assumed that you knew that I wasn't asking. I assumed you weren't asking for a proof in that sense, right? So I don't think it's going to have the effect of shaking people out of their convictions. It's asking people for their evidence and getting them to think about their evidence and then challenging their evidence where it's challengeable that I think things will change and make a person reconsider and reevaluate over the long term. But the bait and switch game just makes them think that you're kind of a jerk and you're not an honest interlocutor, and they're more likely to shut down and disregard you, where otherwise they might have gone, I need to think about that. Those are some good challenges to my evidence, as opposed to being told your evidence it doesn't amount to a proof. You know what? I get this. I'll tell you what's wrong with this. I get this from creationists, young Earth creationists who believe in special creation all the time. Prove evolution, and so you give evidence for it. And they go, that doesn't prove evolution. Well, there's no single thing that proves evolution, for goodness sakes, right? But you can bring out mountains of evidence, seriatim, one bit of evidence at a time, and they'll point to everything and say, that by itself isn't proof. Okay, fine, that's what you want, okay. Now, we roll our eyes when fundamentalists do it to us, and I think that the theists are right to roll their eyes at atheists who play the same bait-and-switch game with the words proof and evidence. And I think his objective is right, that we want to sort of shake people up and get them thinking about this thing and get them to reevaluate and embark on a process of belief revision. But you actually undermine that effort by playing this bait-and-switch game. So I don't think that he should be doing that. I think that's a mistake. He can achieve that by using the word evidence and encouraging people to challenge people on the evidence. The thing that's quick and dirty about this for him is if you don't ever have to challenge a person's evidence by asking them for their evidence, you just demand proof and then say, that's not a proof when they can't pony up an actual proof, then that's easy, right? But that's not a victory. That's kind of a cheap rhetorical victory that doesn't actually score any points with the other person and just leaves the other person thinking that you don't know how to argue and you don't know how to challenge their evidence when they presented it. And I think that makes his position weak. It makes it look very weak. I think it's a terrible strategy. We shouldn't do that. When you think a person's evidence is no good, you say what you think is no good about the evidence. You don't fault it because that one piece of evidence or those 10 pieces of evidence they give don't amount to a proof. There's no single proof that evolution is true either, right? You don't want to say, well, therefore, there's no proof of evolution. Yeah, there's a proof of evolution. It comes in the form of a billion bits of evidence, not any one piece of which amounts to proof by itself.
It's interesting because one of the things he's able to do is sort of, it seems like if he gets put in a corner like this one we're talking about right now, he can get out of it by saying, well, my activism, or American atheists' activism, is only partially directed at actual theists. What we're really wanting to do is normalize atheism and get closeted atheists to come out and to diminish the power that religion has in our government. And so maybe this sort of declaration that there's absolutely no proof he could say might go to those other objectives. And so I'm not sure if that's really true or if that's an excuse, or if that's a bad enough excuse that we ought to work on trying to convince him to say evidence instead of proof. I don't know. I think the jury is out on this.
I don't think he'd want to. I don't think he'd want to take my recommendation, despite the reasons that I gave that I think are respectable reasons. I don't think he'd want to go for it because it would then immediately require that he recommend to his fellow atheists out there, you're going to have to be prepared to challenge people's evidence. You won't be able to dismiss their evidence by hand-waving and saying, oh, that evidence isn't a piece of proof all by itself. It doesn't constitute a proof, right?
And a lot of the evidence given on the theist side is philosophical. And that's tough for a lot of us Merkins, right?
Well, I mean, a lot of it is scientific and historical, and some of it is psychological. People talk about religious experience. People talk about textual evidence in the Bible. They talk about archaeological evidence of digs and stuff like that. I mean, they give all kinds of evidence, right? No one piece of which is going to justify a Catholic catechism or something like that, right? But so what? Like that's not a counter argument to say your evidence is no good because your evidence isn't a proof, right? This is a case of sort of what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I'm unimpressed by people who object to my evidence and arguments for things by being told that it's not a proof, right? That doesn't get me to reconsider a damn thing. It just gets me to lower my estimation of that other person's intelligence and honesty. That's all that happens. You just bump down. I try to apply the principle of intellectual charity when I'm arguing with a person, but when they hit me with that and I go, oh, that's the game you just played, you just bumped down. You just went down. You're losing ground here. You're forsaking some of the intellectual charity that I'm willing to offer, right? And how likely am I to revise my opinion of my own evidence when you won't bother to challenge my evidence, but simply dismiss it?
Yeah, and yet, as you pointed out, Ozzy, this is exactly what happens when creationists say there's no proof for evolution. Right? It strengthens the other creationists because they can all say, look, you don't have any actual proof. There's no proof for evolution.
Right, but those people are who, if they actually say that, I mean, I've known plenty of creationists who think that is a devastating disproof of evolution, that they can say, your evidence isn't a proof. They think, wow, okay, well, great. I mean, okay, you're just in the grips of a terrible epistemology, right? And if Silverman is recommending that epistemology,
then, do you not see the point I'm trying to make right there? You just said exactly what I've been saying.
Which is what?
Both sides don't know how to use the term, right?
I think both sides know exactly how to use the term, and both sides have a tendency to play the bait and switch game.
Well, you're not. I'm trying to say this. You just said that the theists say you haven't proved anything. That's just evidence, and that's exactly what I'm saying. Why he's using this, because the theists do it. They don't know what the term means. So if we can, I think he's trying to say if we both use the same terms, maybe we need to educate each other and everybody what the terms mean. But that's a completely separate issue.
It takes 2 minutes to distinguish the evidence.
Well, then maybe that's a conversation that we need to be having with people and just say this is what one is, This is what the other one is. I mean, when I started on here 3.5 years ago, I used the terms this way, and I think I'm a pretty intelligent guy. I've studied a lot, but this was my understanding. I had no idea that these words didn't mean what you say, what they mean.
Okay,
so and I'm not I think I read a lot, and I didn't know. I had to be told what these terms mean.
Then the question is he being deliberately dishonest, or does he simply not know what he's talking about when he says proof?
I think he's being intentionally dishonest.
Yeah, and so the second question is, does it matter that he's being intentionally dishonest?
Yes.
I take a different view.
Yes.
I think he's a sloppy thinker, and he doesn't care that he's a sloppy thinker, because this is a way of thinking about it and a recommendation that suits his ends. That's how I see it. I think he's just sloppy in his vocabulary here and doesn't care to be more precise. But if someone were to come at him and say, you can't prove evolution, and then he were to give evidence for it, and they said, that's not a proof, he would instantly see through that. Right? But this is like someone who knows how to identify fallacies in your arguments, but will not acknowledge that when they commit the same fallacy by using the same form of argument, that it's wrong for them to use that argument. Right? That this is what I think is wrong. It smacks of motivated reasoning. So my hunch here is that he's not being deliberately dishonest. I think he's just sloppy in his usage and his thinking about these things. He's able to see it with greater clarity when it's coming from the other person and being applied to him in a way that works to their advantage and not to his. But when it works to his advantage and against their advantage, he's perfectly content with the slop.
It's very interesting. That's like an in-between of the two possibilities I thought of. I don't know. I want to think he's more savvy than that, but I guess, the jury will be out for a while. Let's move on. The next thing he says, he talks about Christians who don't read the Bible. He claims that there are no true Christians. They're not true Christians. And the argument he makes here is sort of like the one that we've already talked about, so I don't think we need to spend too much time on him. He says that they must be posers, right? Because if they really, really thought that they had God's words in their hands, they would read it. The fact that they don't read it must mean there's something going on there where they can't honestly and truly believe that here are the words of God literally on their bookshelf.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, something fishy there. Bart Ehrman has a great quote about that. Well, I can't remember the quote, but he gives this example. I've heard him say this in a number of lectures, including a course that he taught that's online that I listen to, where he says he starts each semester by asking his first-year students who are taking a course in New Testament studies, how many of them are Bible-believing Christians? And he teaches at Chapel Hill, North Carolina, so almost all the hands in the class go up. And he goes, great, so you're all Bible-believing Christians pretty much. Okay, how many of you have read the whole Bible? No hands go. Well, how many of you read most of the Bible? And a couple of hands go up, And then he says, wow, and then he says, how many people here have read the Da Vinci Code? This is going back a few years when the Da Vinci Code was sort of hot and everyone was reading it. It's like Harry Potter. It was, a craze. And then all the hands go up in the room, and he goes, well, that's interesting. I'm not saying you have to read the Bible, but if I was a Christian and I thought God wrote a book, I'd read that book, right? So it is kind of fishy,
It's really fishy. It's like masturbating.
Well,
right?
It's like how many of us how many of us former fundamentalists go on these threads all day long, and we are teaching the Bible to the Christians. Like, it happens all day long. Like, it's sad. They believe the book, it's the inspired word of God. Well, do you know it says this? Well, no, it doesn't say that. Yeah, it does, and this is what it says, and here's the context, so you can't say it doesn't really exist. This is what it says, and verbatim, what we said is actually in the Bible. And they go, well, I didn't know that. Well, maybe you should read your book.
Well, I mean, G+ is kind of even a little more extraordinary than, because on G+ at least, there are a number of Christians, in fact, maybe nearly all of them that I've encountered, that really do read the Bible, really do work on it, really do look. Or okay, some,
Yeah.
but in real life, boy, there aren't very many.
No.
So that's
in my experience, I spent 35 years as an evangelical, and I was probably the only person I know that had read the Bible more than once, let alone completely. You know, I read it probably 3 dozen times in 35 years because I wanted to know what it said. So when people tell me they're a Christian and I say, well, have you read this? Well, no, that's not in the Bible. You go, yeah, it is. And then I show them it's like, they don't get it. Well, how do you know? Well, because I've read the book. You know, read your book.
There's a funny thing that goes on though. Like I was a Bible believing Christian. I had a Jehovah's Witness upbringing, and so we believed it was very important to read the Word of God and all that. And I did this sort of thing that you do, where you read so many chapters and verses every day. There are these reading plans basically that tell you, on this date you read these chapters and verses, and on these days you read these chapters and verses. And then if you do that, if you're dedicated, in a year you will have read the whole Bible. And of course some days you're busy, you're doing something else, you don't do it, but then you got to play catch up. You got to go back and reread the sections that you missed and stuff like that. It's just like doing homework. Well, I read the Bible in a year that way, and I have since read it again almost entirely. But I remember when I was a believer and I read it very emptily. I didn't understand much of what I read. It just didn't make any sense. Parts of it were just unbelievably boring, like all the begats and stuff like that. But then there were things going on, like in Numbers and stuff like that, and Chronicles and references to times, places, people, events that I didn't understand. I didn't understand the historical context. The language was obscure, and I think that's what happens. Is people who actually believe that the Bible is this holy book, this sacred thing inspired by God, read it, but they don't get it. And so what they conclude very early on is that it's just over my head, right? It's just over my head. It's not that it's not what it's supposed to be. It's that it's too hard for me to understand. It's like someone who hasn't studied any chemistry, reading an advanced chemistry textbook. They just don't understand any of the symbols and formulas that they're reading in this book. And so they just say, well, at some point maybe I'll be sophisticated enough to understand, but I'll just take it from the experts. I'll learn I'll trust what the chemists say. I'll trust what my minister says, or something like that, or what the priest says, right? And that's how they do it. Most people, I think, get their theology, from sources that they trust actually can understand this book. But they think that, to me, this book is not very understandable, right? It's just too hard. And that's how I understood it. And so I read it, but I read it out of a sense of duty. But I have to confess, I read it really emptily. Like, what the hell am I reading? I read like entire chunks and come away with nothing.
Yeah, like struggling right? through 1 Kings and 2 Kings and 1 Samuel and Numbers, and like, really? Who cares that there were 47,000 sheep? Like, really? That's an important thing? So yeah.
So I think this is a very good point. It's a very good. Oh, sorry. Kevin? Was that you trying to talk?
No. That was James.
Okay, so let's go on. This is a point. I think it's a valid point. About why do so many Christians who will swear up and down that the Bible is the Word of God don't actually read it. I think Ozzy gave a really good reason. I think that probably really is the reason. And also, if you really think you have the Word of God in front of you and you don't understand it, it's going to be kind of scary to read it all by yourself, because you could be misunderstanding, what God is saying.
Is it possible that is it possible they think the work has been done? They live in a Christian society, and therefore they think society sort of reflects the Bible, and therefore they don't feel they need to do any sort of intellectual work. The work has been done. They can see the practicalities of what's required to be a Christian just by simply conforming to whatever the social norms are, because they live in a Christian society, and by conforming with that's easy. They think they're doing the work, and just by laziness they don't do it. So they feel as though they've done the work by conforming, and they don't feel they need to apply their intellect because someone else has done it for them.
I think like Ozzy was touching on it, a really good point. There comes a time when you're supposed to, as a Christian, this Spirit of God is supposed to be in you, and I hear this more and more from more so the apologetic flavor of theists up here than just the typical believer, but the ones who really try to make cases for their belief and stuff. They say that you can't read the Word of God without the Holy Spirit, but yet they rely heavily on their whatever flavor of theology they believe, like their Calvins or their Wesleys or whoever they get their inspiration from, as to like they're reading the Bible, like, and they're reading what the man is like. Matthew Henry had this great big series of I can't remember what they call them, but you read a text and you go read Henry and he tells you what it means. They have a big fancy name for it, but they don't just read the Bible. They have to have someone interpret it for them, because it is a hard book to read. And so they obviously they're not getting it from the Holy Spirit, because they have to go get it from a man. So they trust that the book that they're reading is inspired. They trust that the translations and the accompanying books are inspired, because these people are Christians. So therefore the Spirit of God is moving in them. So therefore all the writers of the book, the Bible itself, had to be inspired, because they're inspired to write the Word of God, but they don't ever look into how it was written, how it was compiled. So the whole blind level of trust upon trust upon trust upon trust, and they get lost and say, I'll just listen to my pastor. I just believe him. And that's what they do. So the pastor can say basically whatever he wants, whether it's in there or not. And nobody ever checks him.
No, I think people just go around thinking the culture they're in sort of reflects the Bible, and therefore, because they like the culture they're in, and it seems sort of fair, and all, and particularly, I mean, obviously America are pretty well off, and this country similarly, therefore, oh, everything seems to be nice, everybody seems to be, the values we seem to have in society seem to be quite nice, you can relate to them as just from a biological level, they seem to be sort of basically correct. Therefore, the culture's right, and that reflects a Christian culture, therefore the origins of that must be right as well. And in some ways, you might be, if everybody I mean, I was shocked when I read the Bible a couple of times. I mean, I've barely read it, so I'm ignorant on this. But I just tried, occasionally I've just tried doing things like picking a random book and a random verse and seeing what it was. About 3 or 4 times I've done this, and it's always ended up with someone being killed just because they happen to slightly disagree with someone. It was just amazing. Some poor shepherd said something, and then he was shut down by God. And I thought, what on earth is this?
And blah 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 displeased the Lord and was smoked.
Yes, I thought, no wonder people don't want to read this. It's just terrifying. You're thinking, this is a horrible creature that's doing these things. It's just a violent, psychopathic maniac just killing things for no good reason, and it's just repulsive. And I can imagine that if you do touch it, you think, okay, there must be I can't be misunderstanding this. As Ozzy said, you can't be understanding this properly. But I like the cultures around me. It's based on this book, therefore it must be okay, really, and won't bother with it.
So I think there's something there's something really true about that. If you start with the Old Testament, I mean, from personal experience, I tried to do that as a young kid, and I literally was horrified, like almost vomiting, horrified.
Yeah.
But let's go on, because Rumpus brings up this cultural thing. So I'm going to go here. So we talked about this no Bible, Christians, why don't Christians read the Bible? Then the next point is this war on Christmas. And I think this is, aside from the next point after that, which is about what happened to him when he started to think about his own Judaism. Let's just hope that the dogs. Okay. I want to get into this war on Christmas a little bit, because to me this is a big part of this chapter, right? So he's kind of wanting to say that he's kind of wants to say 2 things about the war on Christmas in America. The first one is that it's the Christians' fault that that Christmas is losing its Christ, and the second one is that that atheists ought, at least the firebrands, to chip away to help along the process of secularizing Christmas. Right? So he says, ironically, the act that sought to legitimize Christianity by nationalizing its biggest holiday will yield the elimination of religion from the holiday, not the religionizing of America. And American Atheists is helping this along with its billboards and what have you. Right? So he also talks about priority tests, and so he tries to get into the politics and how atheists might manage some of the other ways that we could manage to push along, getting the government away from supporting Christianity. And one of his main things throughout this whole book is about how Christianity is on a pedestal. And let's see here. Yeah, and this war on Christmas is a good example of that. Right? And then he says, well, in 1870 is when they declared it a national holiday. He talks about how it legitimizes Christians, and it does that by using the force of government. And I think he has a really, really, really good point. And I think that it may seem trivial at first. You know, why does American atheists spend so much money on billboards and what have you? So they do the billboards, they do the monuments, they do school pamphlets. They want to address the under God and the in God we trust. And in fact, in some states now, cops are putting that crap on their cars. And that may seem like it's, you know, kind of trivial. It doesn't get at any meat. But he has an argument that, in fact, this is the way that Christianity maintains a privilege. And so I tend to agree with him. I like the billboards, right? And the fact that they're trivial and that so that they can be played up lightly on Fox somehow adds to something. So let's talk a little bit about that section where he discusses, let me go back to it here, this war on Christmas and how it's not as trivial as it seems. Does anybody have anything they want to say about that?
I've got a little thing because I like Christmas and I like the fact that it's called Christmas and I'm prepared to embrace my Christian heritage of this country. And I don't. And someone like Richard Dawkins, for instance, says that he likes all the cultural elements of Christianity and he embraces it all and enjoys it. And I think, I mean, just from my personal point of view, I don't mind something like Christmas, which is all about giving and things, although it obviously has been commercialised. I would say to atheists, embrace it. Say it's part of our cult, make it a cultural thing rather than a religious thing, and say it's nice. It's a cultural event. We atheists, I think, are associated with removing all culture and making everything less traditional, moving traditions. And it's a tradition, and I think if you embrace it as a tradition, but then didn't allow things like "In God We Trust," the "In God We Trust" stuff, I think is pretty revolting. But I like Christmas, and I think you ought to say Christmas is good. I like having Christmas. Let's call it. It's just a name. We love it. It's a nice cultural event. Fine.
Well, it didn't start out as a religious per se. It started out as it was a winter party, right?
Yeah,
so,
absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree.
So the Christians do what they do best and take pagan things and turn them into religious celebrations. I mean, they've done that for 2,000 years. Why would they take any other measure against?
You could point that out, of course. I mean, you could say this is Christmas. It's actually a pagan thing. It's actually ours and not Christian.
Yeah, and when you tell them that. When you put up a Christmas tree, you're violating the Bible, and you do the Yule log. That's pagan, and that's against the Bible. And everything that they celebrate around Christmas is all pagan, and the Bible speaks against all of it. The Bible also says, "Don't make any day more special than any other day, including your birthday." I know fundamentalist people who do not celebrate their birthday because the Bible says not to.
But shouldn't David Silverman therefore be attacking Christmas from that point of view?
Birthdays are originally pagan, and they're not Christian.
So yeah, I mean, there's lots of things, not just Christmas, that Christians do that their Bible tells them not to do. And this is what Helena was talking about earlier, is either they don't know, or it's culturally acceptable, or they just don't really understand what their book has actually said, or they don't take it literally. Right? And if they don't take it literally, then what parts do you keep and what parts don't you keep? This is the fundamentalist, moderate, liberal argument all over the place. I mean, where do you stop? You're either a complete fundamentalist or you just accept what you want. And that's why there's 43,000 denominations.
Doesn't the evidence from the Bible also indicate that Christ would have been born around June, July, or springtime rather than or summertime?
All the sheep being born, baby sheep, yeah.
Yeah, well, let's not bring reality.
Anyway, that's the whole. Yeah, sorry, we're digressing here.
Well, yeah, I mean, rather than get into that, I'm interested in what he's talking about with the U.S. and with government and with how government colludes with Christianity, specifically in the United States, in order to give it legitimacy, right? So
Well, I
he
think,
talks about how. Go ahead, Ozzy.
well, I think the whole war on Christmas thing is sort of indicative of this sense of Christian privilege. The fact that people think that that someone requiring their employees to say Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas is an affront to Christianity and a threat to Christianity itself, right? And an insult to Christians. That I think bespeaks a sense of cultural privilege that Christians enjoy. And he has this word, it's an awful word, he calls it equalophobia. I mean, if
I
anything,
like that word.
call it gallophobia or something like that. I mean, that word's actually been around for a while. It goes back to, at least to the American Civil War, when people were afraid about granting equality to blacks. So I mean, you should be maybe going with the word egalophobia. But yeah, I think that there is a fear that everyone will be treated equally, and that specifically that Christianity will be on all fours with every other religion and every other philosophical point of view, and will not be privileged, right? Will not be recognized by the state as having some kind of special status, right? And
Right.
I mean, the fact that everyone gets Christmas off, they get you get Christmas off. Why is that a statutory holiday, right? Well, because it's a historical accident, right?
I thought it wasn't in America. In the US, I thought
Well,
Christmas
maybe
Day
I'm
is
wrong
not.
about that. I could be wrong. I mean, I'm Canadian. Maybe I'm wrong. I mean, it's a
You
statutory
know,
holiday.
in UK it is. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I assume it is in the United States. I mean, I assume everyone, December 25th is a statutory holiday in the U.S. Maybe I'm wrong. Can someone
No,
correct
you're
me?
not wrong.
Okay.
You're not wrong. It is.
All right.
It is.
So,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So I mean, why is that a statutory holiday? But Ramadan is, or Passover, and stuff like that, right? Why are those not statutory holidays? I mean, this is. But then this isn't sort of collusion between religion and government. This is just sort of a historical accident, and then there's this weight of inertia. But with respect to the secularization of Christmas, I take a different view. I don't think atheists have to do a thing to secularize Christmas.
No, I agree.
But it's because I'm kind of cynical about Christmas, and that is I grew up as I said, sort of with the Jehovah's Witness upbringing. Jehovah's Witnesses don't celebrate birthdays. They don't celebrate Christmas. They don't celebrate any holidays. No Independence Day or Canada Day or anything like that.
You don't stand for the singing of the national anthem.
You don't put your your hand over your heart. You don't salute the Queen or anybody. You don't recognize anything like that. And that's all. These are all things that are of the world, and you don't pledge allegiance to anything in this world or loyalty to this world. You don't pay honor to anything in this world. So that was sort of my view growing up, and so I just kind of took a dim view of Christmas. And one of the things I've always hated, and this has stayed with me, one of the things I don't like about Christmas is the crass commercial character of Christmas, the acquisitiveness that it encourages. There is something very anti-Christian about the crass commercialization of Christmas and the encouragement to acquire and the encouragement of this ritual of obligatory gift exchange, right? That takes all the meaning out of giving someone a gift, right? It makes it into a kind of insincere ritual, an obligation. I got to find something for Aunt Martha. Go on Christmas Eve, the afternoon before Christmas, let's say, and go into a mall, and you'll see people zombie-like walking around in the aisles of department stores looking for something, anything to buy Aunt Martha. Right, because she's low on their shopping list, but they got to do something, right? That, in my view, is what sort of secularizes Christmas. Christmas, it's like Easter. Easter is now about chocolate Easter bunnies and things like that, right? It's economic and commercial forces in our culture that are divesting things like Easter and Christmas of their religious significance. You don't need an atheist for that. You just need capitalism for that. That's happening on its own. So I don't think atheists have to lift a finger. Christianity has sort of lost control of these holidays. They have become secular holidays because they are commercial holidays. And so I don't think we need to be, if you're worried about a war on Christmas, the war on Christmas is being fought in department stores, and it's happening on Wall Street. That's where it's happening. It's not Richard Dawkins, and it's not atheist billboards and American atheists that are divesting it of religious significance. If there's an assault on Christian holidays, it's because of crass commercialism.
They're destroying their own holidays.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Helen, I sent you a message.
Okay, well, I'll get to it later.
Well, it's kind of urgent, so when you get a second, just take a look at it, please.
Okay, well, all right, so I will do that. Okay, so Ozzy just said you don't need atheists in order to secularize Christianity, but I don't think that Silverman would say that's what atheists or what American Atheist is doing. He's just saying it's helping it along. It's pushing it. It's making it go a little faster. What I'm interested in with this part of the chapter is he talks about the loss of privilege and that what Christians are really upset about is, with respect to this, or on Christmas, is that, saying happy holidays acknowledges the marginalized, right? 30% of the population isn't Christian, and to say happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas acknowledges the marginalized. These kinds of terms, equality, right? Christianity is under attack when, in fact, equality, the Christians, for example, see equality as an attack, right? These are sort of where I think he's borrowing directly from what I'm calling modern activism, which involves identity politics and all of that. And I think that this I'd like to talk a little bit about. Yeah. He even directly relates them, right?
Yeah. This is where your article comes up.
This is where the article may come up, and maybe we'll make a separate hangout about that. But he's using the same words, and he's saying, he even directly relates them himself. The idea of equality to women is threatening to some men, just as the idea of racial equality is threatening to some white people, because they perceive becoming equal as a loss of privilege. This is also the case for some Christians who fear losing privilege and becoming only equal.
Only equal, yeah.
Only
well,
equal.
the grand irony, particularly about the Happy Holidays thing, and I think the Happy Holidays thing is one of those things where we get a switcheroo pulled on us, and we're not quite sure that it happened until far down the road. The first groups of people to say Happy Holidays were not the general rank and file or the enlightened liberals. It was the mercantile concerns. And it was the mercantile concerns that were the first people to say Happy Holidays, and they did it because they started to realize, particularly in Canada, that there was an influx of people who were not, either A, weren't Christian at all, or B, were the kind of Christian that didn't involve what Ozzy was talking about, boatloads of gifts being handed back and forth. So it was an attempt not to alienate anybody. And even up here in Canada, like in most most sort of I don't know, I don't want to say small town, but in your mid-sized urban areas, it's very rare that you hear somebody say Happy Holidays. It's usually Merry Christmas, because a good chunk of newcomers to the country, they recognize that saying Merry Christmas.
Oh, give me a second. I'm going to mute. Hold on.
They say that they understand that saying Merry Christmas doesn't mean, hey, shut up and be Canadian, you miserable foreign scum. It means Merry Christmas. So they say Merry Christmas back, because they know that in Canada, when it comes time for Ramadan or for Hanukkah or for Kwanzaa or for Festivus or for Dangle Your Pasta Festival or whatever it is, that everybody else will go, hey, happy Dangle Your Pasta Festival. So
yes, we will.
I don't know if the Happy Holidays thing has as much traction, considering its source. I think Ozzy is right about the whole commercialization thing. I tell you what will send what I do believe will send Christmas back to its roots is if we have a time of global privation like was present during the Second World War. Because nothing makes people focus on the hymns and the joy of giving, of the Christmas, of the angel, of the tree, of the whatever, than the fact that your shopping malls have been bombed to shit. You can't buy things for people anyway. Nothing does a better job than that, right? So I think it's the whole Christmas thing is a moving target.
Well, Silverman does talk about the economy, and does acknowledge that, you know, Christmas is kind of a lost cause now as far as he's concerned, because of how the economy, you know, is really dependent on the gift giving part. I mean, really, and I think that's true. So he's using that to say it's happening, and there's nothing Christians can do about it because now it's part of our economy. But nonetheless, American atheists can push, you know, add and push it along and that kind of thing. I've just now noticed that Arcane is here, and so I'm thrilled about that. And I'd love to hear, Arcane, do you have anything you want to talk about specifically right now, or do you want to wait until something comes up?
Hey, what's up? Yeah, I'm kind of new to what you guys are talking about, so I'll just, unless you have a question, I'll just listen.
Well, we're talking about chapter 3 of David Silverman's Fighting God book.
Oh, I haven't read that, I must confess.
That's okay. You don't have to read it. You don't have to read it to come.
The topics will be expressed and covered as they come up quite thoroughly. So.
All right. So going on just briefly, you know, let's continue here. So we were talking about happy holidays versus Merry Christmas and why it's not as trivial as it may seem. And he kind of thinks that Christians are correct, right? They are losing their privilege, as we being not just atheists, but every other religious person that isn't a Christian here in the U.S., right? And that what Christians are really doing when they fight for everybody to say Merry Christmas is fighting the American way, right? Equality is the American way, and it should not be considered a punishment or a loss when people of privilege lose their privilege in favor of equality. And if it is viewed as such, too bad. Then he introduces his equalophobia. He's got several sort of brand new terms that I think he wants to try to introduce.
I
or
like
at least
making up new terms.
Well, he's testing the waters, right? One of them was inclusive atheist. Now he's got equalophobia, right? And claiming that Christians are equalophobic. And even says that they must be called that, and they must be called out for being that way, right? So his thing, Merry Christmas, right? Happy holidays instead of Merry Christmas. It's really about Christians demanding inequality and wanting to single out one holiday as special over all the others. And so he says then it's too late because of the economy. We talked about that for a second. But here, he sort of builds a little bit of support for the kind of activism that American atheists do with their billboards and their monuments and things like that, saying, again, that it's chipping away at the legitimacy that the government grants to Christianity in ways like the stuff on our money, now on cop cars, forcing kids to say under God every single day of their life, things like that, right? And he says by protesting the government's favoring of Christian-only aspect of the holiday, we force the government to highlight only the secular aspects. So without firebrand atheists screaming about saying happy holidays, something that seems as trivial as that, there wouldn't be any pressure on the government to highlight the secular aspects of Christianity. Or if they would only be natural, they would be because of the economy. Whereas here we can add a little to it and speed things along. So he's saying that equalophobia is the very reason that they're fighting against monuments, and why they want to be able to pass out Bibles in schools but not let us pass out pamphlets right next to them, stuff like that. And this goes along, then, his next move is to talk about what kinds of small, little, tiny steps could we perhaps get through in the government to even push things farther. And he talks about, he thinks perhaps there could be a priority test, right, where politicians should be asked, what's more important, your religion or your country? And what happens if the interests of the two conflict? He says, we need to make sure that anyone who takes public office will place the law of the land and the well-being of its citizens above his or her religious demands. He wants every politician everywhere to state unequivocally that the United States Constitution outranks everything, including religious texts. And then he cites Article 6. So he moves from happy holidays to some pretty serious government problems going on in the United States.
Well, he's calling them back to the Constitution. And I think you've got one of your two parties with a whole bunch of silly guys thinking that, I know Cruz has come out and said he has no problem, ripping up the Constitution, and Trump has made very clear that he's willing to break the law to do whatever he wants, and it's like, come on, guys, you're the President of the United States. Your job is to support and defend the Constitution, and you're the leader of the Army, which is in place to defend the Constitution. So when you get your leaders talking like that document doesn't really matter, that's a real problem. So that's why he's making that call them back to what they're supposed to be doing.
And I think about how Bernie Sanders answered the question about his faith versus how Hillary Clinton answered the question about her faith. And she said, "Oh, I pray. I go home and I pray for people I know, and I pray for this and I pray for that." And Sanders was kind of pushing the cultural Jew idea. Mm-hmm. I think he's probably an atheist. I don't know. Maybe it's unfair to say that, but I do think that.
What did he say? What did he say?
He's about to tell you.
Yeah. So I've seen two places where he approached that issue. The first one, he went pretty much directly to humanism, but the second one, during the debate, he talked about his Jewish heritage, right, and how he valued it. And so he kind of pulled the cultural Jew card, if you will, mm-hmm. And Silverman addresses this in the very next part of this book. But I don't know. What does everybody think about this? I have to agree with him. I don't like the idea that I don't mind the idea that politicians say they talk to their God, and even if they do talk to their God, that they use their God's advice somehow to help them make decisions. I guess that's okay. But what does bother me, and what I think American Atheists is trying to uncover, are the politicians who aren't sincere believers, but who say that they are because they know they wouldn't be able to get elected. They'd be marginalized and all these other things.
You mean
they
all
just
of them?
said, sorry? No,
you mean all of them?
Well,
not all.
There's 535 members of Congress and only one that I'm aware of out atheist. Like, there's something wrong statistically with that number.
Gosh.
It's just the demographics of your country aren't that. So obviously there are people that are pretending, lying, I don't know what you call it, who are saying, yeah, God, to get elected. And then they're stuck having to support that agenda, or they get booted out of office. And I think once you're in there, it's kind of tough to give up that position of influence. And so it's a nasty game.
This is interesting for me as a Christian, for sure. I agree with David Silverman on this a great deal. Like the whole concept of equality, saying Happy Holidays instead of saying Merry Christmas. I don't think it's it should be a big deal on behalf of Christians to be pushing that, especially when December 25th has nothing to do with Jesus Christ as far as we know it anyway. It's paganized, kind of like Easter. I don't celebrate either, so I have a unique opinion, I guess. But when it comes down to regulating certain things about people after they're elected, I think if those people run on those principles and they're elected by, the demographic, within America, and they're true to what they run on, I don't think David Silverman or any group should have anything to say about that. That's their constitutional right to run as whatever they
want. Not if what they're proposing violates the already established Constitution. That's the point Silverman's making.
Yeah, I agree with that, absolutely.
Okay.
But at what point do we stop? I mean, the hypocrisy, in my opinion, shows up because David Silverman, I believe, is a secular humanist, which is classified as a religion, and so, when once a person gets in the office and he starts promoting secular humanist ideas, would it be fair for Christians to step up and say that that's non-constitutional?
He's not a member of any Congress or legislature. He can say whatever he wants. He's the director of an atheist association.
But
But I
let's
mean,
talk
if
about
someone,
the larger point. Let's talk about the larger point Arcane was bringing up, which is, namely, suppose you do have a secular humanist who does get elected, and now he's quote unquote promoting secular humanism as a religion, if you will. So I think what David Silverman wants to say to you, Arcane, is that you are looking at that situation from your perspective of privilege. So to you, it seems like he would be doing something that he wouldn't really be doing. And that it looks that way to you because what's really happening to you is that you don't like your privilege being dissolved.
yeah, I would say depends on what he means by privilege. I understand what you guys are saying as far as electability. If they're not promoting some kind of religious viewpoint, they're not really electable, at least from the demographic standpoint. So you're saying a lot of people are lying just to gain that sort of privileged majority position. I think that's wrong, of course. I'm not for that at all. It should be equal. You shouldn't have to lie to get in the office.
Well, that's
just
exactly
to please a certain demographic.
Yeah. There's a couple of people from Arizona that they're just starting to get their election bid, and the first things they've done is said, I'm an atheist. So she's looking at it like I'm either committing political suicide, but I want to be true to what I am. I can't hide it. I don't want people thinking I'm something I'm not, and then they can make up their own mind. That is what Silverman's calling for.
I applaud that. I mean, slavery wouldn't have been abolished if people would have just gone along with it the entire time and said, oh, I support slavery. Someone had to break the mold. And I think if atheists want the respect demographically, they're going to have to be ballsy and just, say, I'm an atheist, I'm proud of it, this is what I believe, and I hope that I get your support. But trying to use government to wedge their views in there, I don't think that's a fair go either.
Okay, so let me ask you a question then, Arcane. The last, say, 30 years of bills that have passed, some of them have been very, very pro-religious, pro-Christian positioning. Any gay legislation that some of the legislatures in the states are passing right now are in complete violation of the Supreme Court ruling. Mm-hmm. So, say a whole 500 atheists get elected, and they go and overturn those laws. Would you have a problem with that? Because they're standing up for the decisions the Supreme Courts have already made. That's all Silverman's asking. Christians should be willing to do that too, but do you think a Republican or a Democratic, mostly Christian majority House or Senate would just say, these laws are just wrong because they're wrong, not because of any religious thing. They're just wrong because the Supreme Court has said they're wrong, and let's overturn them. How would you feel about that?
Well, I would have to respect the process. We are in a majority Christian, well, some would argue that now, but, throughout history, America has been, pro-Christian, pro-religion. This is the demographic that we are in. So we have to respect that. If these Christians are being elected and they are pushing their views, they're speaking, or they're supposed to be speaking on the behalf of the people and not their own personal ideological agenda. So we have to respect that process. Like I said, atheists would have to, gain the trust of the people in order to infiltrate or claim their spot in these positions to make a change on their behalf. I think that's the only fair way to do it.
You go ahead, Oz.
A couple of things. First of all, I mean, Silverman is not someone who's saying that the religious have no place, pursuing political offices or anything like that. And he's not saying that you can't be religious and be in office, right? And he's not even saying that you're not allowed to push your religious agenda. That is, if you have certain values and they're religiously inspired. I haven't read yet that where he's saying you can't push for your moral values and try to push them through a democratic process by democratic means, even if they come from a religious source. He thinks people should be able to challenge that, but he doesn't. I haven't read anything where he says that you shouldn't be allowed to do that. What he's saying is that you should never be allowed to privilege your religious values over another's religious values, and you should never be able to subordinate the Constitution to your religious values. No politician should ever say, "I answer to a higher authority than the Constitution." The president doesn't even take an oath to protect America or Americans. He takes an oath to protect and preserve the Constitution.
Yep, exactly.
And it doesn't mean a piece of paper. It means the set of ideas enshrined in the Constitution. I mean, literally, the president is not supposed to preserve American lives over the Constitution. The Constitution comes first. That is the highest law of the land. And so what he's recommending... Now, I'm not actually saying that this is a good idea. I mean, first of all, I don't have a dog in this fight. I'm not American. But I think there's a bit of... I think Americans have a tendency to look at the Constitution like it's a gospel.
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous, yeah.
Yeah, but it seems to me that he shouldn't... Maybe I'm wrong about him, but I don't think he's suggesting that people shouldn't be allowed to push their values, philosophical or religious, through as politicians, provided they're doing it through democratic means. I think he'd be okay with that, and as long as they subordinate everything to the Constitution. But the other thing to understand is that we don't elect positions. We elect candidates. We elect people, and we understand that people have values, and their values can be religiously motivated, or philosophically motivated by some non-religious philosophical considerations. I don't think there's anything wrong with understanding that we're voting for people, and that people's ideas can change, and consequently, when their values change, they might want to change their policies. But when politicians make political campaign promises, obviously they need to make the efforts necessary to make good on those promises. But I don't think you can hold a person to a certain philosophical vision. Oh, he holds to this philosophical vision. I voted for him on that basis. He's changed his philosophical vision. Therefore, he's somehow betrayed me. No. You don't. I voted for you, and I was trusting that you would stick to that vision. But I voted for a human being, not a piece of programming that doesn't change itself. I voted for a human being, and I understand that human beings can change their views, and that can happen. I mean, I don't know how it works in the U.S., but in Canada, it's always galling and annoying when it happens. But you can vote for someone, and they can cross the floor and leave the Liberal Party and join the Conservative Party, and vice versa. It happens. It's annoying. People don't like it. They feel very betrayed. But it's allowed, and it has to be allowed, because what are you supposed to do? You have to step down because you've changed your political views? No, I don't think there's any disgrace in that. So I think that has to be allowed, as annoying and disappointing as it is. It happens rarely enough that it's not a big issue.
Yeah, I mean, I think about the moral. People might have a moral philosophy just simply to be, I've got, my morals are above everything else, and to say to someone that your highest authority is the law of the land, and I'm going to ignore my morals, seems to be unrealistic. And in some ways you would want people to have a moral sort of attitude, and that would be the highest thing that they call upon, and not want to have to sort of lay down them, because you can't define the morals anyway. So to put some sort of quiz test, which is what's suggested there by Silverman, that you have to then say, oh well, everything I think is going to be subordinate to what's in the Constitution, is for a start, that would presumably mean it'd be very difficult to change the Constitution if you had some wish to change it, and that might be quite legitimate. But I think trying to say that's the highest authority in your own personal moral philosophy wouldn't be higher. I think that's probably unrealistic.
Yeah, I mean, people have to be able to answer the dictates of their own conscience. I mean, I'll give you an example. I mean, Jehovah's Witnesses will be the first people who will tell you, I will never take an oath to protect the Constitution and make it my highest value. Right? A Jehovah's Witness doesn't seek office at any level. Right? Because they have to say, I would have to subordinate my own values to preserving the Constitution. you will never see a Jehovah's Witness running for president or any political office.
Chances are you won't see them in the army either.
Well, they're usually conscientious objectors, yeah.
Exactly.
Well, they've been drafted, but they usually get away with conscientious objector status. But and there's a privilege right there, actually, the fact that if you declare yourself of a certain religion.
Well, keep in mind we're talking to two different countries too, right? There's no draft in Canada. It's the conscription. Everybody gets taken.
That's right. But no, but we have conscientious objector status in Canada.
And it's a lot tougher to have a conscientious objector status in Canada than it is in the States. It's not impossible. It's just more difficult. I do know. It's more difficult.
Okay, but just so the point I was trying to make there is this, that Silverman is concerned with the idea that there will be people out there who would subordinate the Constitution to their religious values, and what he's saying is that should not be. Nobody has any business running for office who would violate the Constitution based on their religious convictions, or any convictions, even philosophical convictions that have nothing to do with religion. You have no business going there. You're taking that oath. You're taking that oath. That has to be your high. That has to be the supreme value. Now that might be a bit unrealistic. I think. I don't think people work that way. But I understand. It makes sense what he's saying there to me.
But if you wanted to change the Constitution, presumably that means that you're basically agreeing to not wish to change it.
Constitution should never be changed lightly. I mean, Canada amended our Constitution, I think, once during its entire existence, and we had a horrible punch-up over that to do it. And I mean, it should never be easy to amend or change a Constitution. Never.
Was that what you have? It isn't in the States. The States has something like 22 amendments or something like that. I don't know how many.
I think we're up to
amendments. But there's a process. I mean, people sort of worship the Constitution in the U.S. sometimes. They talk about like it's inviolable and it can't be changed. Like these same people will go on about the Second Amendment. It's an amendment, right? You can change the Constitution. You can take things out of it. You can add to it, and you can reinterpret things that are in it. There's a process for doing it. There's a process for doing it right in the Constitution. The Constitution itself does not understand itself to be something that's inviolable. So to say that I pledge to protect the Constitution is not to say I pledge to protect the Constitution and never try to change it. It's just a pledge to never change the Constitution other than by the way prescribed in the Constitution.
That's right.
Change the Constitution.
They have a process for it.
Right.
So I'd like to ask Arcana, what do you think about these seemingly trivial concerns that some atheists have, like, let's get in God we trust off the money, let's get under God out of the pledge. Do you see those as examples of trying to wedge in an atheistic or secular viewpoint where it doesn't belong?
Not necessarily. If they go through the process and the proper channels and they do it constitutionally, I don't see any issue with that. If they feel discriminated against in some kind of way because in God we trust is on the money, it's their right to appeal it. So
that's what they're doing.
That's not a constitutional.
It's not a constitutional
thing. You could change the pledge to say, and one nation indivisible under Satan. You could say that and it wouldn't violate the Constitution. And,
I just mean.
It was changed in the first place to add that bit, wasn't it, in the 50s?
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
As long as they go about it lawfully and don't.
So if you don't mean that, you made a statement a little bit ago before we got into this Constitution discussion about how it seemed to you that secular humanist, even a hypothetical one who somehow got into office, assuming that were possible, you would be concerned if they tried to wedge their beliefs in. And I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit on that, because I figured that the examples I gave would be examples that you would agree with to the idea of wedging. But you said, no, that's not what I mean. So sort of what do you mean? What do you see as the potential dangers of seculars coming in and wedging in their beliefs?
Well, like I said, if a secularist came into office and wanted to promote his beliefs, whatever they might be, as long as he does it through the democratic established process. Not that I completely agree with the process anyway. It's basically majority rules, but um, as, as long as they're not going against the grain of what's established as law of the land, if they try to circumvent the majority on the behalf of the minority, that's not really what we're built upon. So if they have that agenda to infiltrate behind closed doors and kind of change the way things are just because they feel that they're
So I go
not
back
being
to
on equal plane, that's when I think it becomes hairy. It's like a conspiracy at that point.
I go back to the example I gave you. Like there are state legislatures right now putting in anti-gay legislation, which the Supreme Court has already settled that your country will support same-sex marriage. There are states passing laws right now that violate that. There are states passing legislation that will put homosexuals in prison for having anal sex for 15 years. Now, does a secularist come in and have the ability to overturn that because that piece of legislation violates what has already been mandated by the Supreme Court of your country? How is that wrong?
Well, it's not a secularist that would necessarily overturn it. He has to get the people behind him. Not to say, well, I believe in states' rights, first of all. So,
State does not have the right to overrule the Supreme Court in that kind of a law. It doesn't.
yeah, I agree with that, but I also do agree in states' rights. And if people try to change the process, of course they have to go about it the right way. So I don't see any issue with anyone bringing an issue forward and trying to affect change. I just think that they have to do it through the process and not crap on the process. Don't try to appeal to something, you have to have the people on your side, basically, is what I'm saying. And if the atheists or the secular humanists don't have the people, they have to work for it. They have to earn it.
I don't think you're understanding what I'm saying, but that's okay.
Maybe not. Maybe not.
Well, I mean, then we start getting into fundamental questions of democracy in the first place, right? I mean, when do we have to say that there is the shadow of the tyranny of the majority, right? Like what I mean, for the longest time in the United States, it was illegal anywhere for homosexuals to marry, and homosexuals represented a smaller portion of the national population than heterosexuals did, but they weren't criminals. They had every right to be married, but because in many ways the majority had a belief that they weren't supposed to be, you had a tyrannous majority there, and somebody had to step in and use the power of office to break that tyranny of majority.
We don't even have to use that example. We can go back in my lifetime and probably yours, Gus, that interracial marriages were illegal in America. I mean, there's somebody that piece of legislation. I mean, it's crazy that it took them until the 70s to pass legislation that allowed that to even take place, where the people wouldn't have to go to jail.
But my point is that at what point do the people, because I mean, Ozzy was talking about the idea that at some point you have to accept that you're not a robot, and that even though you have an office, you have to stand for something. At what point is it okay to go rogue to protect a minority? I mean, it's a difficult. I mean, because the problem is that if the only way we govern is strictly through majority, people get left on the edge of the plate, and then they get knocked off the edge of the plate. So you essentially have, you essentially have the government of the biggest group of people by the biggest group of people for the biggest group of people, and minorities can go fuck themselves.
That's why when America was founded, it was a constitutional republic, not a democracy, for that reason.
Well, it was a constitutional republic because despite the fact that there was an awful lot of highfalutin talk about freedom of men, the majority landowners in that area still didn't want the great unwashed making decisions about their wealth and their land.
That's a
Given
whole
them-
other discussion.
It may be a whole other discussion, but it does handily answer that point.
Yeah, let's go back to what Helena wants to talk about here.
Well, I think that we've let's
Oh,
continue. Oh, go ahead, Dee.
I was just going to say, given that America is a secular country, presumably the government should be secular. So should we be concerned that a secularist would get in? I don't get. But
Yeah,
anyway,
if the secular guy he doesn't take over the government. If he gets elected, then you would assume that he's got the populace behind him. There's no other way he'd get elected.
The concern is that if secularists get elected, right, people who are openly secular, that they're not going to carry on the policies that privilege.
That's right.
right, yeah.
That's why people are so anxious about. Oh well, we don't want That's why people will flat out say, I would never vote for an atheist. They have all these weird prejudiced ideas about what atheists will do if they ever have power. Right? This is nothing short of an obscene bigotry, and they fear that the first thing they'll try to do is make atheists of all of us and outlaw our religion. We got Ted Cruz going around, imagining that people are going to be rounded up and that his precious Christianity is going to be made illegal. I mean, this is just a bizarre fantasy. David Silverman is no friend of religion and Christianity, but I don't think he wants to make it illegal, right? I've never heard him say anything to that effect, and he's about as rabid as they come. But this is what people are worried about. They're worried that if openly irreligious and anti-religious people are going to be elected, they're going to try to not just pass laws that don't privilege and equalize things, but that they're going to sort of make the religions illegal. I mean, I've heard this in Hangouts. I've heard groups of evangelicals in Hangouts talking about things, and they sound absolutely shrill and hysterical. There's nothing else to describe it. Shrill and hysterical, what they imagine that atheists will do if atheists take office and are elected openly as atheists. They sound absolutely crazy and hilarious, right? Except that they believe it, and so it's not just fun and games. It's they are terrified of atheist boogeymen, and it's all born of an absolute bigotry about atheists.
Who's terrified?
What would Americans think if they lost
evangelical friends of yours, as a matter of fact. I've heard G-Man and Ronnie and things like that saying things, hangouts that were just frankly hilarious about and hysterical about what would happen if atheists get in office, right? And how that they will make Christianity illegal and they'll round us up, and then they're citing bits of Revelation and stuff like that. It's preposterous.
I was wondering what actually secularists actually would do in office in America. Things like "In God We Trust," I think, could probably do with removing from your money, and presumably where those privileges. I mean, obviously Silverman. I don't know if Silverman actually listed those privileges, Helena, in the piece that he thinks do need removing. Obviously, things like the James was talking about, the things like the states passing laws, obviously, that are incompatible with the Supreme Court rulings. But I was just wondering, did he have a list of specific things that he would remove if he was a secular government, so that he could lay out the manifesto for a secular American president?
Wasn't Stalin an atheist?
Could I just read out the comment I've just seen in the side chat from Wim Sweden? He or she has put, they interpret the removal of privilege / preferential treatment as persecution. Yeah,
which is this equalophobia business that or egalophobia, whatever it was. Which they don't like the fact that there's a perception they have a privilege and they don't want to lose it. But presumably they also think the worst might happen. They might be persecuted. Almost the G-mans are trying to, whether they really believe it or not. But obviously they like to raise that sort of issue. They're actually going to be persecuted and not just simply made to be on an equal footing with people who don't have religion.
Yeah, well, that's not my observation, by the way. That's a big point that Silverman, I think, rightly raises in this chapter.
I think so
Can
too.
I respond to that?
Yes, Arcane.
I think, especially as of late, with a lot of the hostility put forth by some of the new atheists like Dawkins and Hitchens and these kinds, where they say, you know, we should openly ridicule and mock and get rid of religion. And looking at other secular or atheistic regimes in the past, whether you attach their ideology onto their murdersome methods, I think is irrelevant to the scope of how it's perceived by, you know, especially people in America and the Bible Belt. So there weren't, you know, they have justification for being skeptical of an atheist in office. And it's not just as laughable or as ridiculous as it may seem if you consider history. So
Western European democracies all have basically non-religious people or people in the office that do not advocate religious rules and advocate equality, and so there's nothing desperately bad that's going to happen.
Is it 5 of the top 6 or 4 of the top 5 of the best places in the world to live right now are secular?
Yeah,
By
right.
like they're like less than 10% religious in them at all, and they're all Scandinavian.
I was going to say, yeah, the Scandinavian countries.
You know,
Yeah,
there isn't. It's not a secular government. Isn't what the theists think it is.
Yeah, because they're basically humanists, which means they respect humans and the rights, and they treat everybody universally as the same, and their privileges should be the same, universal, respected, and their welfare is what's concerning them. Whereas the religious contingent do not necessarily consider the welfare.
I would narrow that down to more of a fundamentalist-based religion, because not all religions think that atheists are demonic. I mean, are from the devil or whatever. There's just some of them do.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, those are the ones with political power right now.
well, wasn't Stalin an atheist?
Don't even go there, Arcane. Okay, it's not even. Let's not even talk right
He also had a
now.
moustache. He also had a moustache. It's the moustache that did it.
Whoa. That's a question, and I think it deserves an answer. I don't think it deserves a let's not go there.
Well,
Yeah, I'm happy to address that if I may. I mean, first of all, atheism is the view that there isn't a God. It's not the view that it's okay to just kill people.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to exterminate people like Stalin does, you have to believe a lot more than that there isn't a God, right? Because thinking there's not a God is not a license to kill people. It's not a reason or a justification or a rationale or a motivation to kill people. What motivated Stalin who was the true madman of that century, much more so than Hitler. He was very efficient. He just starved people.
Hey, let's not leave out Pol Pot. He'll get mardy about it.
Yeah.
Hold on. Let's talk about what motivated them.
Yeah,
Sorry.
You have to believe the kind of thing that Stalin believed. You have to believe that that capitalism is a diabolical system of oppression, that it has to be eradicated root and branch, that the most efficient way to get rid of these moral reprobates is not to talk them out of it, because their economic interests are at stake and they'll never surrender those, is just to get rid of them, and that this revolution was not going to come from below, but that it had to be forced and it had to be brought about through a coup. Combine that with the fact that he personally was absolutely paranoid and fearful of enemies, because he did in fact have enemies. He went on these purges and started killing people all around him who were close to him, not just distal political enemies, but people who were close to him. I mean, the number of preposterous things that Stalin had to believe to do what he did is rather akin to the number of preposterous things that Pol Pot had to believe. Right? There's a lot of preposterous things in communism, and there's especially a lot of preposterous things that you have to believe to be a Hitler. And so what moves a person to murder people en masse is always going to be a set of preposterous beliefs. It's not that I think there isn't a God. I mean, look, Christians burned witches for 500 years, okay? I'm not blaming any Christians today for that. Why? Because Christians in the main today don't believe in witchcraft. They just don't believe in witchcraft. They don't take it seriously. Okay, it's
I don't know
preposterous.
what Christians
okay?
you're talking about, but
Well, I could most of the Christians I know. Okay, but there are some Christians who do believe in witchcraft. Okay, but you don't just
Christians
have, you don't just
murder, so.
well, hang on. You don't just have to believe in witchcraft. You have to believe that witchcraft specifically is something that comes from Satan, and that you have a mandate from God to exterminate witches. In other words, just being a Christian is not enough to explain why people would burn witches. Certainly being a theist, just a theist, someone who just believes in God, right, isn't enough, right? Look, atheism is just this big umbrella for anyone who thinks that there's no God, okay? That will not by itself motivate anyone to kill anybody. You have to believe a raft of preposterous things, just like you have to believe a raft of preposterous things to start rounding up women and torturing them into confessing that they're witches, and denouncing other people as witches, and then executing them for that crime. Okay, you've got to believe a lot of preposterous things. It's not enough to say, "I believe in the salvific power of Christ's sacrifice." That will not do it.
Right. Well, there's nothing in Christianity that tells us, or nothing that Christ said, tells us to round up witches and burn them, or anything of the sort. It says to love our neighbor.
There's an Old Testament passage that says, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch to live," and throughout European history, for 500 years, we burned witches.
Well, listen,
and some places are still doing it.
And they're still doing it today.
Christian God.
Well, if I could finish,
but nonetheless, the point stands that it's not enough just to be Christian in order to burn witches.
Well, if I could finish, I'd appreciate it.
Okay, let's let Arcane talk.
Yeah, there is nothing. If you are a Christian, and you cannot justify going out and killing anybody unless it's in direct self-defense. So, people who say that Christians were doing like the Crusades and Christians were doing, this and that.
And here comes an old true Scotsman fallacy.
Those were not Christians by any. Yeah, I'd appreciate it. Those were not Christian, and you cannot find any passage in Scripture where Christ would condone doing such things. Those are opposed to what Christ said. So it's really sad when people keep saying that, because it's a false equivocation on what is a Christian and what isn't. We can argue that, but I just wanted to get that.
Christians fornicate.
Can I finish? As far as your claims about, there's nothing in atheism that says to do this. That might be the case, but in fact, there's nothing in atheism that says not to do this. And I think this is the issue.
Right, which is why it can't be the motive.
Well, if I could finish.
Why it can't be the motive.
I think you're actually proving Ozzy's point more than anything, but carry on, sorry.
Okay, we're going to let Arcane finish, and then Ozzy's going to get a chance to answer, and then we're going to move on. Or maybe Dee and some others can answer afterwards, but I think Arcane wants to finish talking about gatekeeping and that kind of idea.
Yeah,
so,
I don't need to answer. Let him finish. Let him have the floor. That's fine.
Okay, go ahead, Arcane. Finish your thought, because I think you're going to get into a kind of a gatekeeping kind of thing that might go both ways, as far as I can tell. So go ahead, go.
Well, like I said, there's nothing in atheism. Atheism doesn't have a stance on morality. There is nothing in atheism that says we ought not kill people for political or whatever gain. There's nothing there. From a Christian perspective, there is something that says you are not supposed to do those things. So I think when you're saying about an atheist coming into power and this kind of thing, that is the reason why I believe a Christian is not like there is a phobia. It's just a different ideological stance that is warranted by history.
Your God has advocated the massacre and genocide of children and entire populations of the world. So for you to say that Christianity hasn't advocated appalling things is just ridiculous. And also, if you were to say, if Stalin had been a Christian, I've no doubt you'll be saying, oh, well, Stalin, well, he was just an errant Christian. But he did not murder people because he was an atheist. He murdered people because he was a power-mad, crazy, paranoid freak who just happened to get himself into a position where he could do that. Nothing about his atheism drove that.
You know that?
Well, yes, he never said. He never said anything would indicate that. So, unless you want to imagine you're just going to ascribe him his atheism. But there's nothing about atheism as a concept that says you should kill people. Atheism is just simply atheists simply do not believe in a God. It's nothing more than that.
Point,
Whereas
I
your
think
God,
Arcane's point.
that's one last point. Christopher Hitchens has pointed out that the religion is capable of turning perfectly rational, sensible people into murderous, monstrous creatures that will kill people and ignore human considerations. And your own God is written down in your Bible as wishing to murder people and advocating genocide, torture, rape, and destroying the almost entire population. His history actually advocates this, whereas nothing in atheism advocates that. Anyway.
Spoken from an ignorant perspective on
Okay,
Christianity.
Arcane, drop the insulting, Arcane, please.
Stupid.
I think Arcane is trying to say not so much that atheism advocates it, but that there's nothing in atheism that would prevent
because atheism doesn't speak to those issues. That's why you are an atheist and or something else. You can be a secular humanist and still be a Christian. Atheism doesn't have a corner on the market on secular humanism. Anybody can be a secular humanist.
Arcane's in denial, it seems to me, about what the Bible advocates. I mean, it's just ridiculous how you can close your eyes to what is before you and written down.
Well, but now this gets into something, right? I mean, do we really want to force Christians who are working hard to change Christianity and make it more moderate and have it align closer and closer and closer to secularism? Do we really want to try to tell them you can't do that? You must be barbaric. Your religion is barbaric, therefore you must be barbaric. I think that is going to get into a problem when we start trying to, if we do that to Christians and then we do that to Muslims, how are we ever going to sort of bring Islam, into a more moderate position?
Christianity's been doing that for thousands of years, of moderating themselves to fit the culture. It's like we don't use the 10 Commandments. We use parts of 2 of them for a reason, because secular laws and secular societies live differently than those 613 Mosaic laws. We don't live like that anymore. So,
right, but so if we try it in our arguments as atheists to corner a Christian who is a moderate, and to try to force them to espouse the older, viewpoint or whatever, or say to them, you can't be so moderate. You may not be so moderate. Is that a good strategy?
Well, I think
that's not a good strategy. And when we then move to Islam, we have nothing. How are we going to? What are we going to say?
Well, they're going to have to, if they want to live in countries that don't have their legal structure, they're going to have to live within it or take over it. I mean, that's what their goal is. But to address the other issue, Christianity itself has been moderating since it started. I mean, look at all the denominations that don't agree on everything. There are liberal Christians who would think nothing of throwing out the Old Testament and just completely ignoring it. And there are moderate Christians who find stuff like hard Calvinism like crazy. And then there's the other end of the spectrum, the Calvinists, who think all the rest of them don't understand the Bible. And it's like, we don't have to divide and secularize Christianity. It's doing it itself. But, it's like you got the United Church who basically doesn't enforce anything, and anybody can come and everybody's welcome. They don't care. So you've got everything in between. So they're doing it themselves.
Anglicanism has demonstrated this greatly. I mean, obviously, from its formation in the 1500s, now it's almost like a social service now, where they've abandoned most of the doctrinal stuff, and it's basically just being the philosophy is about being kind to one another and going to church and being sort of vaguely believing in God. I mean, it's evolved and it's rejected most of the doctrinal parts of the Bible. It's rejected the advocacy of killing people for mixing different threads in your cloth and going and picking up sticks on a Sunday.
If you have an Anglican. Oh, go ahead, Gus. Go ahead, Gus, and I'll make a point.
I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to criticize the rumpus here because you're talking about a lot of Old Testament stuff that nobody does anymore, and that may have been done once upon a time, but Jesus said, "I came to fulfill the law." Okay, so a lot of that stuff that you're talking about is actually not okay to Christians. And
Well,
I think you're. Excuse me, but I think you're being a bit doctrinally sloppy there.
Oh, hold
And
on.
I think you run your head headlong into some really easy stopgap targets, because what ends up happening then is that guys like Arcane can say, well, you don't know what you're talking about because Christians don't believe that, and he's absolutely right.
Well, hold on. But Jesus surely said that did he not say that he had not come to change any of the Jewish law?
He came to fulfill the law. Jesus, you have to understand about Jesus is that he said a whole bunch of shit at the same time that is seemingly contradictory.
Yeah,
but
agreed.
having said that, you have to watch what the majority of Christians do, and the majority of Christians don't stone adulterers. They don't follow the 666.
That's what I'm saying about Anglicanism.
But the problem is the 1%, and not to turn this into a fight between you and I, but you don't talk like you agree. And I often see you holding Christians to Old Testament stuff that, generally speaking, by and large, usually, Christians spend a lot of time trying to distance themselves from.
Well, not the fundamentalists I'm interacting with, but I perfectly agree. Anglicanism, I have perfectly accept that they've cherry-picked the Bible, and they have a philosophy, and I don't really object to Anglicanism.
It's not.
If you will, let me just bring this conversation back down. If you have an Anglican in front of you, is it, and you're an atheist, is it good or not good to try to force them into saying things that they no longer believe, or isn't it a better strategy to promote their moderate, view and work to get the ones that are less moderate even more moderate? And let's talk about that for a second, with Muslims in the back of our heads as we do it.
But who's trying to make Christians be less moderate? Who's doing that?
Well, that's often an argument I hear in G+, right? Where you'll have a moderate Christian in front of you, and the atheist will say, well, you must believe this, you must believe that, you must believe this. And they go, no, I'm a moderate. I don't believe that. I don't believe this. I don't believe that. I have a different spin. I have an interpretation that allows for kindness, and however you want to frame it. And a lot of times the atheists will be working hard to make them be more fundamental.
I don't think so.
I really don't think that. I think by far the biggest shit that moderates end up taking, quote unquote, is that they supposedly screen the fundies. Like I've never seen anybody look at Deidre or anybody like that and say, you know what, please turn into something more radical so I can better attack you. I don't.
No, but they're not hoping that she will. However, they often try to force the moderate Christian into agreeing that their doctrine says this and that.
Well, okay, but I think that's I think that's different. I think sort of atheists saying, look, whether you like it or not, this is what your Bronze Age survival manual says. I think there's a big difference between that and saying you must do what your Bronze Age survival manual says. I didn't
mean to imply that atheists are telling them they must do it, right? I think that it's an effort to try to get them to change their mind, right? But by trying to get Bronze Age book says. But let's talk about moderates, because there are two, to me at least, seem to be two kind of competing ideas about sort of how atheists should handle moderates, right? One of them is the one that I'm kind of saying now, which is we should encourage moderates, and that it is through the moderates that the extremists will, be brought up and be more secular. The other is that, and maybe these don't oppose one another, but the other is that, if we let the moderates get away with it, then the moderates kind of give a little extra credibility to their more extremist, more fundamentalist cohorts. And so I'm wondering, can we talk about this difference here?
Yeah,
I've never agreed with that statement. Anybody who thinks I don't know the difference between Deidre and someone who's nutty, anybody who thinks that somehow I think that I won't notice the nut in the background because Deidre's in the front going smooth, 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 smooth. I mean, they must think I'm retarded. So, and I understand that one cannot project oneself writ large upon the cosmos, but I mean, I like to think I've got half a brain, so it's a great place to start. So I've never understood people who take that attitude. I never really have.
Well, I take the attitude that moderates provide cover for fundamentalism, but I don't hold moderates accountable for what fundamentalists say and do. I'm just saying it is a consequence of our acceptance of religious moderation.
Xbox, killing me.
So Ozzy, you might need to start at consequence.
Yeah, I don't remember what the hell I was saying.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It was.
No, it's okay. No, it was
I was
one
like,
noisy.
I got the anus of people. Oh, God.
Ozzy,
Okay,
Ozzy, you were saying that moderates provided some sort of cover, even though you
Yeah.
didn't think that they were. Yes, you said something else as well.
Right. I don't hold religious moderates accountable for the actions of fundamentalists and what fundamentalists say, even though I think that our acceptance of religious moderates as a serious and respectable position, right? Religious moderation as a serious and respectable position, has the consequence of providing cover to the discourse of faith. What I think is problematic about all of this is the discourse of faith, the idea that you can sort of accept things very, very strongly and organize your life around a book on the basis of very, very bad evidence. Right? And I think moderates do this to a lesser degree than fundamentalists do. But they are, I think, organizing their lives around a book of fairy tales. Right? This is just a book of fictive history. It's a tremendous mistake. It is a religion that is falsified by cosmology, and astronomy, and physics, and history, and geology, and archaeology, and biology. I mean, this religion, Christianity, is a false religion, and you don't have to, believe that one still has a responsibility to burn witches at the stake to be in the grips of a false religion. Okay, and the sense in which religious moderation provides cover is that to the extent that we say, okay, well, their specific views are not so offensive to me because they're not trying to teach creationism in the classroom, right? To the extent that we think, okay, well, that's okay, and we say, well, we're not going to criticize them and their religion, okay? We're not going to criticize the discourse of faith when it comes to them. It makes it very hard to criticize the discourse of faith when it comes to fundamentalists and radical evangelicals or Islamists. This is a real problem. It's an inconsistency in our position. The discourse of faith is the problem, right? Then it's a problem even if the people are moderate in what they believe. I mean, Jains, Sam Harris is sort of famous for talking about the Jains. I mean, the Jains are not out there hurting a lot of people. In fact, the more deranged and more fundamentalist and more extremist a Jain becomes in his or her belief, the less violent, the less of a concern that person becomes to the rest of us, right? So what you specifically believe matters, is consequential to us. But I think what is worrisome here is the discourse of faith, is this idea that, oh, well, if it's not breaking my arm or picking my pocket, I can just ignore it and I can just leave people to believe in these falsehoods. And then, of course, there are unintended consequences of people running around believing a pile of what we see as manifest falsehoods, which is why I think we have to be critical of religious moderates to the extent that they are saying, no, you should not criticize religion. It's not right. There's an awful lot of moderates who say that. Now, they don't all, fortunately. A lot of moderates say, no, we can criticize religion. In fact, a lot of moderates are highly critical of fundamentalists and evangelicals and Islamists and stuff like that. And actually, some of them have been named in this hangout. And it's to their credit that they do that. That shouldn't absolve them from being criticized themselves. But there are some moderates, a lot of moderates out there, who think, no, I'm moderate. That proves that the discourse of faith is legitimate, and you shouldn't criticize me. Well, yeah, but if that's true, then you can't criticize anybody.
What's the difference in, and can you hear me okay now?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I apologize for a minute ago. What's the difference in dragging someone from believing in a religion, dragging them out of it, as them dragging you into theirs?
There's no difference. I think everyone has a responsibility to try to talk people out of what they judge to be false beliefs that are detrimental to themselves and to that person that we're talking to. And
Why do you have an issue with religious fundamentalists?
I think they're mistaken. My objection to fundamentalism is not that they're trying to persuade people. It's that I think that they're just flatly mistaken. My objection is not that you're trying to persuade people that your view is correct. I commend you to the extent that you try to use rational persuasion when you try to use rational persuasion to convince people. I think everyone has a responsibility to do that. I think it is a good and moral thing to try to talk people out of what you judge to be a falsehood. This idea that I should only be concerned about people who are driving off the cliff, right, or are going to push me off a cliff, that I think is a selfish attitude, right? I should be, if I see somebody walking around looking down at a map and he thinks his map is correct and he thinks he's getting somewhere walking in a straight line, but I can see he's walking in a circle, I think it's kind and decent of me to say, hey, you know what, I think your map is wrong. Right?
Well, the problem
doesn't have to be hurting. It doesn't have to be hurting me. He doesn't have to be walking off the edge of a cliff for me to say, hey, you know what? I think you're making a mistake.
Well,
so I don't mind when fundamentalists try to persuade me. I don't like it when they try to legislate things such that I have to observe their religion. That's a problem. Or they try to privilege.
Well, absolutely. With all respect, though, I mean, I understand where an anti-theist comes from, but I think that anti-theism, in many ways, is likely to do more harm than it is good. I mean, I would rather live in a neighborhood full of moderate Christians than a neighborhood full of self-interested atheists. Because in the past, I have discovered that moderate Christians, for whatever reason and under whatever circumstances, and regardless of whether or not their acts or behavior could be duplicated, generally tend to be extremely conscientious, extremely neighborly, and extremely gentle-hearted folk. And if it's their God that's, I think it is presumptuous of us. Now let me back up a bit. Our job as human beings, okay, we have a number of jobs as human beings, I believe. But the biggest job we have as human beings is not to fuck up anybody else. Okay? If you can't do anything else with your life right, stay the hell out the way. Like, as long as you can do that, when they go to put you in the ground, I'll say nout bad about you, you know? And at the end of the day, most of the moderate Christians I know, indeed a vast majority of moderate Christians I know, not only try to adhere to that notion, but they often go out of their way to contribute something. They go out of their way to be gentle. They go out of their way, you know, to reach out and you know, to put them to self. And I mean, I can just go on and on about this. And if
Can you define a moderate Christian?
If it is their faith that's doing that, if that's their faith that's doing that, then I don't know if I have the hubris to argue with that. I think and the other thing too to keep in mind is that in this world today, you can bet your ass that by the time, you know, most of us here are over 20 years old, and you can bet your ass that by the time we meet a counterpart who is a moderate Christian, they've already been told 60 ways from Sunday that what they believe isn't true. So on a personal and on a human and on a social interactive level, they could fucking do without us telling them on top of it. So I don't know. I think I really think, you know what, Arcane, I'm fucking talking, man.
Arcane, if you could just let Guts finish, and then we could perhaps go into what's considered
like,
moderate
honest
Christian.
to God, dude. So, you know, I really, you know, and worst thing about it is I'm sticking up for you too, and you're on my ass.
Well, then hurry up.
Fucking excuse me. Like, if you're bored, fuck off. Like, around here, we wait.
Anyway.
I don't know.
I agree with what you say, Gus, as well.
I'm really uncomfortable. Like, I understand where Ozzy's coming from a notion of pure thought. Like, you would look at a person and say, but why do you believe that? It isn't true. But we are not creatures of pure thought. We are creatures where we're like giant fields of like spinning plate, like the spinning plate act in a Chinese circus, where everything is counterbalanced inside of us. And I really don't necessarily think you're always doing somebody a favor by constantly and consistently challenging them on what they believe.
Well,
if by the notion of what they believe that they're otherwise contributing to society.
Okay, well, I'm not suggesting
before you go, let's handle the question Arcane's tried to ask several times, right? And let's just, maybe we can come up
No,
with...
you know what? Personally, I don't think Arcane should be allowed to ask that question because he couldn't fucking wait long enough, honest to God.
Well, I'm
Like,
going to give him a
seriously.
chance, regardless of what you think. Arcane wants to know, what do we mean by moderate? At least as far as Christianity goes. And I think it's worth talking about because we've got Islam on our backs. So,
Well, I think, as I keep on advocating, I think the Anglican religion we've had for 500 years, and being obviously one of the leading civilizing forces in the world with Britain, the Anglican Church has basically followed the sort of social mores of society, and we've ended up with Anglicanism, a very moderate, socially orientated, humanist, almost a humanist organisation, and a lot of people are drawn to that, as Gus was saying, that the people who are the big advocates of Anglicanism in this country tend to be those people who are looking for somewhere to do good, and they do good, and there's obviously involvement of charities, and they advocate a moral philosophy, and we even have representatives in our parliament, the upper house, that actually spend their time worrying about the moral situation, worrying about people and concerns. So there, I think we can argue that I don't mind the influence of the Anglican religion in my country, although I'm a militant atheist, and I don't believe the word they say, but it's almost like it's become a philosophy, and the fact that it's got this sort of horrible Bible thing at the top of it, they've actually turned themselves into something different. They've cherry-picked all of what you would regard as the best bits of the Bible and turned it into a sort of culture that's actually quite pleasant to have around.
yeah, so is a moderate somebody who doesn't act on their belief?
That's right, the doctrine, yeah, there is basically acting upon the doctrine that is embedded in their horrible book.
Yeah, my idea of what I've always thought a moderate was is one that can mix reality and their belief well, right?
Well, they would say that their belief is reality.
Well, like with the fundamentalists, will clash in places. They'll clash with reality, and they go with their belief over the clash, and
Yeah, so it sounds like maybe maybe I was onto something, that we are defining moderates as people who don't act on their beliefs.
Yeah, I mean, when people like Sam Harris talk about moderates, he is in fact talking about moderation in that sense. He's not talking about liberal Christians, right? He's not talking about liberal Christianity, right? Christians that have sort of embraced a lot of liberal values. He's talking about a version of Christianity that has sort of suffered a lot of withering defeats in the face of modernity, so that they've just had to ignore a lot of what's in their book and are no longer reading their holy book and understanding their theology in traditional terms or in literalistic terms. Right? So a move away from that kind of literalism.
How much more liberal can you be?
And,
but you still haven't really defined what a moderate Christian is. Just defining what it's not isn't really, I don't know.
Well, no.
What about my definition?
That's what I was trying to go for. That is, in fact, what I think people like Sam Harris are talking about. Is moderates are people who just no longer take the book very seriously. They read everything figuratively. They sort of cherry pick and Kefti.
Yes, cherry picking is the key thing.
And they try to, and it's got to sort of conform to modern values, and if it doesn't conform to sort of modern secular values, then for the most part they just say, okay, well then it's going to be, it has to be understood figuratively to make it conform and stuff like that. They just sort of reject all of that. They as I think people like him see it, moderate Christians are not very serious Christians, where I think a lot of liberal Christians are very, very serious, but they're not necessarily moderate in the sense that they don't take their book seriously. They just take a very, very different interpretation of it. But moderates are people that we think of nominal Christians, people who are nominally Christian. They might go to church every Sunday and they self-identify as Christian, and but they just don't live their lives very differently, and they don't organize their lives around this book and around these teachings. They live pretty much like everybody else does. Right?
You see, that's where I have a problem with the whole division between, or this false division between what's so-called moderate Christians and a, what do you call a fundamentalist Christian? A Christian is a Christian, and I think these labels that atheists are trying to put on them.
Well, actually, it's Christians.
It really isn't fair.
James, we can't go after Arcane for interrupting if we're going to interrupt him.
If a person self-identifies as a Christian, according to the teachings of Christianity, they are supposed to bring people to Christ and walk with Christ. So all of this moderate, to me, that's nonsense. There's no moderate Christians. Just like, I've heard the term lukewarm Christians before. The Christians that'll go to church on Sunday, but then, 6 days out the week live like everybody else. To me, that's not a Christian. And you can try to pull the no true Scotsman, but it's coming off of what Christ himself said as the standard, not what someone says, well, I'm just going to decide, this is the kind of Christian I want to be.
Well, what he meant to say,
it's like you're chasing a ghost in this respect. You're not really, speaking on Christian. You've made up a false Christianity in my belief.
No, we haven't.
Well, the thing is this, Arcane, as far as us atheists are concerned, we don't care about that, right? It's okay with us if you are going to say that the moderates aren't even Christian, right? So we are interested in sort of something that you might think of as tangential, but for us is very important.
I don't know why it's important.
Oh, it's important because we don't want you thinking that way.
Well, we don't want you thinking that way.
I understand, right? But I mean, that is why it's important to us. So the issue that you're talking about is something that's probably very important to Christians and probably also very important to religious people in other faiths. But to us, it really isn't important. But so for us, our question is, what do we do about the moderates? I mean, I am torn. I do agree that moderates cover. However, when we look at Islam, how are we going to bring Muslims or even Islamists, if you want to make that distinction, how are we going to bring them along? How are we going to carry them and help them to transform their religion into something that doesn't involve chopping heads off if we don't promote or at least not reject
Well, I hear the objections
figurative views.
I hear most of the objections coming towards Christianity in the way of, of course there are people who oppose Islam and they're in some of the radical things that they do, but Christians are all about, according to the doctrine, supposed to be about loving your neighbor, people being equal. There's no, superior group of people.
That's not in the Bible.
God loves everybody. So for people to be opposed to these kind of views, for people to tell you, hey, God loves you and there's a plan for your life, why is this such an issue?
Because I think it's false.
Because it's false. It's false, and also it has implications too. But I think for atheists, it's probably better to stick to the it's false than to go off on the implications.
Well, then you'd have to prove
that's maybe what Ozzy's trying to say.
You don't have to prove it's false, Arcane. You've heard this argument many, many times.
You can just claim it's false.
I think, James, you summed it up in the sidebar. A moderate is anyone who the fundies disagree with. I thought that was perfect.
That's actually a good definition.
What you're saying, you don't have to prove it's false, even though you can say it.
We aren't the ones making the claim. Stop playing this game.
Well,
and this would be a tough task, right? Like, how do you convince someone that their parents are wrong? How do you convince someone that they didn't even have parents? How do you convince them that their parents were teaching them wrong things?
Well, that's the onus would be on the person making the claim that the religion is false.
You're
So if you make the claim that the religion is false, if you make the claim that the religion is false, the onus lies on you.
You're agreeing with your claim that God is real. You have to prove He's real.
You're saying it's false.
Can we return to Helen's question?
Yes.
Can we not go down the rabbit hole of what is or isn't a real Christian, funny Christian, or...
So let's actually, rather than keep it in the back of our heads, let's address Islam. Islamists, Muslims, and the question of the moderate.
Okay. I can take a stab at that if I may. It actually sort of follows right on the heels of the question that Gus was sort of asking me, like why are you being so hard on the moderates if they're there's such a big difference between moderates and fundamentalists, right? And I think it's the entire discourse of faith that has to be
Who is doing washing up while in the background?
I don't know.
Sorry, that's me. Sorry.
I think the entire discourse of faith has to be devalorized, right? I mean, people will say, well, you've got to have faith, and they'll say this with a straight face, that's kind of ridiculous, right? The idea that you have to respect a person's faith, right? That you have to respect a person's religion, not their right to a religion, but that you have to respect their religion, that you can't ridicule them. I mean, Arcane came in here and was sort of talking about the thing that we were talking about earlier on, that Dawkins quote about ridiculing religion. A lot of people feel threatened, like, oh, they want the right to ridicule my religion. Well, listen, the religious, I mean, they don't hold back ridiculing the views of other people's religions and the non-religious. They don't have any qualms about it. So that's why I think what's good for the goose is good for the gander here. This is good for everybody. It is good that we criticize one another's beliefs. So when it comes to moderates, I think that they have to be challenged. But it doesn't mean, I guess, that we have to hector people, right? And you said something about, like, you have to go after them, relentlessly, or something to that effect. I don't. I mean, you've seen me in Hangouts. I don't sort of pester and hector people who are religious moderates, right? I tell them I think your religion is bullshit, and if they ask me why, I'll tell them why. And if they say something that I think, say something specifically that I think is bullshit, I'll tell them why I think it's bullshit, right? But I'm not trying to legislate against their religion. I'm not trying to legislate against fundamentalists for that matter, right? Nobody. I mean, I'm not trying to sort of rule out of court the right to believe these things or express these things, right? I just want them to be seen as stupid and quaint and false, the way we think of things like astrology and pyramid power and stuff like that. I think this stuff is all preposterous, and it ought to be seen as that.
Monkeys.
And if you think that people evolving from apes is ridiculous, then what you do is you challenge it, right? No one is arguing with you that you don't have a right to challenge this stuff, right? So I think we do each other favors when we do this, but no one has to be rude about it and obnoxious about it, and you don't have to ruin Thanksgiving dinner, and you don't just sort of unleash on a person when you first meet them because they have a cross around their neck or something like that. That's not how you proceed. And so with respect to things like Islamism, though, fundamentalist Islam, right? That's a much harder nut to crack because, first of all, there's not a lot of that right here. We're not embedded in that culture. It's kind of hard for us to sort of talk about strategies, right? But of course, where that is a big problem is precisely in countries where they are extremely numerous, right? That is where the majority population is Muslim, even if they're not all Islamists, right? That really is a job for other Muslims, right? There's nothing I can say as sort of a Western Canadian atheist that's likely to change the mind of an Islamist. It's almost nothing I could say. That's an internecine struggle. That's something that has to happen within their walls, within their own communities, among themselves. They've got to do that battle, right? All I can do as a non-believer is try to discredit the entire discourse of faith. Right? That whole way of thinking, right, I think has to be discredited and marginalized.
But you have faith.
Yeah, we all have faith in things, right?
Why are you trying to discredit, marginalize something that you yourself hold?
Because there are things that we have to accept on faith because we don't know how to deny them. They are literally irrevisable. They're not inerrant. It's not that they couldn't be wrong. It's that they're irrevisable. So things like properly basic beliefs, I think that we all take those on faith. But then there are other things that we take on faith that are in fact falsifiable.
Well, how can you discriminate on faith, though? Come on.
What do you mean you discriminate on faith? There
Well,
are
you're
things that we take on faith.
one set of faith is unacceptable, but I'm going to accept this set of.
No. By faith here, I'm not talking about one person's faith versus another person's faith. There are things that I think that we all universally, in common, accept on faith. These so-called properly basic beliefs. Okay, these are things that we don't even have the grounds for rejecting them, for revising them. Right now, I don't want to get into a big discussion about epistemology here, but there are things that we are simply not in a position to refute.
So
right?
If you're not in
let me finish, please. Okay, you asked the question. I'm trying to answer it. But then there are faith claims that I think we are in a position to challenge on rational grounds. And those I think we should challenge on it. So there are faith-based claims that I think we're not in a position to challenge on rational grounds, and there are faith-based claims that we are in a position to challenge on rational grounds.
There are different types, yeah.
Right, and the faith-based claims that are not properly basic, that we can challenge on rational grounds, we should.
Yep.
And I think it's a mistake.
The rational ground, your very rational ground that you're using, you take on faith. So it's basically like
everyone does. Everyone does.
You're basically saying in a nutshell, I have faith that your faith is false, and that I should oppose your faith. Which to me is the ultimate.
The use of rationality is faith-based.
Can I finish now, or?
No. You're mischaracterizing my position.
No, I can't. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's right. You're mischaracterizing my position. You said you're basically saying, and it's nothing like what I'm saying. Okay. So
in a nutshell, it is what you're saying.
Well, okay. I'll let you characterize it that way if you want. You go ahead.
Yeah, you came out of your own mouth. You said we have to have faith.
I'm not going to disabuse you of your mistake. Go ahead.
Yeah, you said we have to have faith in these things. These are our properly basic beliefs. Well, what brings you to the conclusion that you should criticize someone else's faith? The faith in your properly basic beliefs. You have
Come on, Arcane.
I have a video on the subject, and I invite you to consult it.
Yeah, we're going down a rabbit hole here. Moving on.
Well, let's not. I don't want this to become.
Say move on all you want to, but that's pretty common.
Arcane, this isn't your hangout, okay? If we want to move on, we can do whatever we want.
Okay,
guys.
Since okay, so when some atheists here, like Ozzy, has entered a all Christian hangout, or Helena, they have been respectful of all Christian hangouts and not derailed them.
I would have let him finish.
Okay.
Okay, and I don't see how it's derailing. We're talking about faith. So if he can attack my faith, why can't I attack his faith?
You can, except that the faith-based claims I have are the faith-based claims you have. Properly basic beliefs are universal, I would submit. And so there isn't a faith-based claim that I hold.
Well, that's based on faith.
That you can attack. No, it's not. That you can attack. And you want me to explain it? I can. But for instance, something like the idea that there are other minds, something like there's a mind-independent reality. Okay, the idea that there's such a thing as a self, that there are causes and effects, right? These are all properly basic beliefs. You hold them too, so you can challenge them to me if you want, but you'll be attacking the very source of your own rationality.
You hold them by blind faith. I do not.
What's that? I didn't hear what you said.
Those things that you're proposing as being your properly basic beliefs, those things I claim as knowledge. So you can't really just lump me in.
I'd love to hear a justification for how you know that there are other minds without begging the question.
Oh, well, you've heard it plenty of times before. If you want to go down that road again,
No. I don't want to waste time on. I mean, we're supposed to be talking about Silverman's books and so the sort of implications of it, and you're trying to bring things back to epistemology. This is not going to turn into a discussion of presuppositionalism. I'm simply not interested. We've had that conversation. You can have that conversation with other.
Then why are you attacking people's presuppositions?
Be quiet.
I'm not attacking anybody's presuppositions.
There you are.
No. What I'm arguing is that the discourse of faith. I'm arguing that the discourse of faith needs to be discredited because it has the result of people believing all kinds of preposterous things. All those other religions you think are ridiculous.
Like evolutionism, secular humanism, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. All those things that you think are ridiculous because they strike you as irrational and faith-based, you're out there opposing them too. Why are you opposing them when I do it?
Because I have a transcendent ought that says that we ought to be rational.
Well, I submit that is an absolutely extravagant
based on
faith-based claim. No, it's not based on faith.
Sure it is.
The fact that you don't have a demonstration of it, and I would submit won't be able to produce a demonstration of it, I think vindicates me. But can we not have this conversation? Can we not just sort of stick to the conversation that we're trying to have?
Well, I think I can find a way to bring it. I think I can bring it back around. So I mean, the exchange between Ozzy and Arcane right now is an example of sort of the kind of discussions that we need to keep having, right? Where one person challenges one person's faith, another person challenges another person's faith, arguments about whether or not it's faith, if it's a different kind of faith, all those kinds of things are all part of this great community. I want, just taking it back now to Silverman, and Spackle, the Holy Spackle, came in to spackle things over for us. She was unhappy. She was unhappy with all of our.
I'm extremely unhappy, and I'll tell you exactly why.
Okay.
I can be labeled as a moderate because I don't think the Bible's inerrant, right? And I can be labeled a moderate as I take a libertarian view a lot of times on society, right? Like if your rights don't impose mine, then I'm not going to impose my rights on yours. Now, where my moderate ends is in my personal life. I can be very conservative in a lot of ways, where I can be very, very committed to Christianity in a lot of ways, in service, for instance, and caring for my fellow man, for instance. It's a big deal to me, and particularly because of the Christian world outview. So when somebody says a moderate doesn't take faith seriously, I get very frustrated because I don't think that's true. With the time that I've invested, the way that I've looked into church history, the way I've looked into theology, the way that I've served in church, I don't think that's fair. Now, your average moderate, we're going to pick on Keefe. Keefe has literally said that he does that. You don't want to burn, do you? Okay, I believe in Jesus, just in case. He literally has said that. That would be the moderate you're talking about. So when you talk about a moderate, or when you talk about a fundamental Christian, okay, well, who's a fundamental Christian? Is Arcane a fundamental Christian, or is Maximus a fundamental Christian? Maximus is an Augustinian. Some people say Maximus is a moderate because he treats people sometimes similarly to I treating people, but then when it comes down to his theology is more conservative. He cares about whether or not he masturbates or not. I don't. You know, like
you don't care about whether he masturbates.
I don't care, but I do
So
care
as a
about
moderate,
chastity.
what is your definition of a moderate? I always thought Max was a moderate. But
Right.
tell me, as a moderate, what is your definition, or at least start us talking about a good definition?
I'm going to try to tell you that fundy, moderate, and liberal doesn't exactly cut it. And when you see Eve real ranting about that, she is right. When she's saying it's more like a sliding scale, and you can go the sliding scale on how you treat society, sliding scale on how you view the Bible, sliding scale on what kind of theologies you adopt, it really is like that. When I have known conservative Christians that don't act like Steven Anderson, and then there's conservative Christians that do act like Steven Anderson. So like when you say moderate or fundy or when you say liberal, you're really shorthanding it. Which kind of liberal do you mean? Do you mean Borg, where he's almost unrecognizable to Christianity, or Spong, where he's almost unrecognizable to Christianity? Or do you mean Rob Bell, who's still somewhat recognizable to Christianity? Which liberal do you mean? You see what I'm saying? So it's a sliding scale. All of them are sliding scales. So anyway.
Yeah, so the nuances that you're talking about with respect to Christianity, I really can understand. I guess we're using, atheists use moderate as perhaps recklessly. But now when we talk about Islam, I don't have I hardly have any knowledge with respect to Christianity to try to talk about Islam. I couldn't imagine what other words I could use than moderate or extreme. So, you know, that speaks to perhaps atheists need to do their homework more.
I think in colloquial usage, moderate tends to refer to people of faith who are less likely to impact people who are not of faith.
Yeah,
I think in colloquial usage, that's what we mean. I mean, when we say moderate, we mean the Christian who the only reason that we know they're Christian is because we just happen to have learned it at some point, or because they may say God bless you and that's as far as they go.
What would you guys label me as then? What's my label?
That's real far from reality on a lot of their beliefs.
Am I a fundy? Am I a moderate? What am I?
But I mean, just to sort of to continue the explanation. So I think really it's I don't know what it is with you, Arcane, you know, but your interruptions are really able to fuck up my train of thought today. And the more you do it, the angrier you fucking make me.
He was all right then, Gus. Calm down.
Don't tell me to calm down, Rumpus, because I can get twice as mad at fucking people telling me to calm down.
Well, don't.
Well, watch me fucking do it anyway, because I don't take commands very fucking well.
You were talking about how moderates, the colloquial use of moderate.
Yeah, I think that Gus is onto something. I think perhaps that's what we mean. Like, a moderate is someone who doesn't try to make me conform to their beliefs.
Well,
The
let me try and simplify
colloquial way is push it on to somebody else. That's what we say colloquial, and the colloquialism is sloppy, but it provides a good central starting off point.
Can I try and simplify this? It's as an atheist, we don't really have an iron in that fire. Christians can call themselves whatever they want. We don't. It really doesn't matter. The point is, they are the ones making the claim. They are the ones that have to provide evidence for their position. We don't care whether they call themselves a moderate or liberal or a Calvinist or a Baptist. It doesn't matter to us. It matters to Arcane. And when Arcane, you asked, what do I think you're a Christian because you claim you're a Christian. To me, that's as simple as it is. If you claim you're a Christian, well, you're a Christian. I might ask you, well, explain what that means. But if you say it, well, I'm going to take your word for it. I don't think you're lying. I don't assume you're lying. I don't care whether you're an evangelical or a Baptist, an Anabaptist, a Methodist, an Anglican. It doesn't matter to me. You identify with the claims of the book. You are a Christian. That's all I care. That's all I need to know. Everything else is you guys fight it out. We don't care.
Well, I don't know. I don't think that stands. I mean, there is a difference between the nice Christian family that lives down the street, who, the wife finds out that you're sick one day, so she brings you a pie. There's a difference between them and the guy with the sandwich board with the hair sticking straight up off his head, ringing the fucking bell, going, "Repent, for the world is soon at an end."
Well, the problem is that
there is a difference between those two sets of people. Now, we have come colloquially, as people, we've come to refer to the latter as a fundy and the former as a moderate. That's my point in terms of citing colloquialism.
And also, of course, the fundies are very keen on passing legislation, certainly in America. They don't get a chance over here, of course. But in America, they seem to be dead keen on passing legislation to impose their views on others. Whereas I get the impression that the more humanist and the Catholic type are quite happy, except, I suppose, on some fundamentals like contraception and things. They are where they don't try and impose various obscure bits of their doctrine on others.
Well, they don't try in countries that they know they'll get no traction. But remember, there are still some strange pseudo-Catholic nonsense going on in Africa, for instance.
Right. So Catholicism changes with the culture, and as much as I defend Catholicism, I also will say that Catholicism in Haiti is not the same as Catholicism in Ireland, and Ireland is not the same as Catholicism in England. Like, you'll find more Catholic fanatics in Ireland than you will in England. You just will. I come from an Irish Catholic family. Trust me, they're very, I don't know what the word is, very conservative and very almost superstitious.
Can you have abortions in Ireland? I remember they come over go to Northern Ireland to get abortions sometimes, and I think unless you're raped or something, you can't have an abortion in Ireland at the moment.
I think we're in the process of changing.
They're in the process of thinking about it. Yes, but they're quite backward in that regard.
I'm not anyway. Yeah,
it's because they don't use birth control like good Catholics, and then they don't want to have a kid like a bad Catholic. It's really messed up.
Can I interrupt real quick and ask you, like, how far we did get into the book? I did miss the whole first part.
Only Helena knows how far we are into this.
We're just
point. I don't want to derail from the great conversation we're having. I just wondered.
Well,
sorry, I was making an afterhang since we're going off, but I liked the conversation. We got almost all the way through. We skipped the Jewish part, which I think was probably doing him a disservice, because that, I think, was probably really important to him, about the fact that cultural Judaism evaporated when he tried to defend it for the book. And then we have touched on the Islamist part. And the final section of chapter 3 is what he calls lying atheists or bad atheists. Bad atheists. So we actually, even though I let it meander a bit, I thought it was valuable. And additionally, I think we covered a lot of the book, a lot of the chapter. I'm going to be creating an afterhang so that this one can close. But I think I like this discussion. I'd like it to continue, even though it's going a little off of the specifics of his book. So I hope that's okay.
Fine by me.
Fine by me.
So maybe we could talk a little bit about Islam and sort of what should be the right atheist response, or is there one? And what is Silverman saying that fire-red atheists should do in response to Islamists?
I'm very keen on a very militant response to Islam and the ideas they have. I find so revolting that I think these ghetto, in the UK, for instance, we've got the odd bit of ghettos where they have a culture that doesn't actually interact with the rest of British society. They even believe they've been questioned on things, and they actually believe they're living in an Islamic state in this country because they're unaware of the society in which they live. And I think those need to be tackled very actively in terms of education. I am against faith schools, for instance, and that they need to be brought out and integrated with society, and they cannot be allowed to have this poisonous philosophy injected into their children. And we need to get in there as a secular state and make sure they acquire the values that I regard as civilized, and we need to be very vigorous about it.
There's a lot of that makes me nervous. What are you prepared to do?
Well, I mean, obviously, for a start, we should stop funding faith schools, which enables them to have these little ghettos and just speak to one another. And they don't. For instance, they're also we are now having suggestions about having citizenship classes and things where they are asked to consider what makes a good citizen, and I think that would have a good effect. As I say, if they can't fund the faith schools, then they're going to have to use the state system, and that has basic rules. Whereas, in fact, we have some horrendous schools, some in Birmingham, that have just been broken up, where they were teaching that Jews were worse than pigs, and that the society in which they lived, the West society, was flawed and horrible, and a variety of other revolting things that would not be allowed if the children would not be subjected to if they were not in faith schools. So I think faith schools is the big target for me, and I think if you can inject a civilizing influence through school, that would do much to curtail their treatment. But I don't think any tolerance. And the thing, I'm also for banning the hijab, for instance, that any sort of, because I regard that as an oppression of women, even if some of them seem to believe that it's okay. They actually, like slaves, sometimes they think slavery is fine. I think these women have been so brainwashed. I know some of them voluntarily do it, but fundamentally, I think that we shouldn't allow fully clothed women to be wandering around interacting with certain, and we've had laws recently passed in the UK which to mean things like if you go to court or if you're in a doctor or something, you shouldn't be wearing a face covering, and those sorts of things I would like to see much more of that. Perhaps you disagree?
No, I just think it would take a problem from bad to worse. I think you would the state would essentially be going to war on a single religion, and I think.
Well, France at the moment is actually prosecuting women wandering around in things. Well, you can't disagree with faith schools. I don't see how the faith school removing support for these fundamentals imposing their.
Well, I mean, France is enjoying, and when I say enjoying, I'm saying, tongue in cheek. France is enjoying an awful lot of ethnic backlash down there because an awful lot of what's going on down there borders on outright racism. France has always been a country, specifically in the last 2/3 of a century, that has advertised sort of a freedom and a kindred spirit and liberté, égalité, fraternité, mais c'est juste si vous êtes blanc. You know what I mean? Like there's not an awful lot of there's an awful lot of exception and ethnic people sort of being put to one side, being relegated to specific industries, being kept down artificially. There's a really mixed legacy down there in France, and I don't think it's a good idea for Great Britain to be looking to France for any of their ideas about how to essentially control and this, you're not going to like this, but this is inevitable. Once upon a time, in every land, there was a First Nation, and then along came a Second Nation, and now there's a Third Nation. I say that particularly to North Americans. North Americans aren't having children. eventually there will be far fewer of the second nation than there are of the third nation. And I don't know how you're going to control that without essentially turning your country into South Africa.
Yeah, that's a big problem, and I certainly object to the infiltration of these horrible ideas and these ghettos and this getting a sort of mass. I can't remember what the percentage of Muslims are in France. They are, but they're more moderate, obviously, than the ones that have recently come over. But yes, I agree with you. There is a problem, and I think that's why things like faith schools have to be stopped. You have to turn these people into the very least moderate Islams, and hopefully destroy their religion completely. As far as I'm concerned, I would be more than happy to see all Islamists in the world removed. I don't think they've got the social services that I regard them the pleasant. I mean, like in that case, I'm like a Richard Dawkins who wants to destroy religion. I can put up with Anglicanism, which is, I say, basically lost its doctrinal spine, but the Islamic stuff, which is not just a religion, but it's actually a way to live. It's a program, it's a manifesto of how you should live. And the fact that these people, I mean, there was just a program I was just watching in France actually, was they were going around mosques and finding that, Italy, and they were there was a program going around, reports going around asking what they thought about women, and these various people emerging from mosques were saying, well, if we had our way, you wouldn't be allowed to dress like you are at the moment. We'd be imposing upon you the fact you couldn't wear those high heels and that shapely dress. There's a barbaric force out there that needs countering, as far as I'm concerned. Militant though that may be.
Okay. I am unable to create this hangout immediately, so what I'm going to do is close this one out and start another one for the after hang, and I will post both links, both the watch link and the join link, in the live chat of this current hangout. And I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Does anyone want to say anything just to sort of end this up?
Thanks for watching.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Thanks for having us.
Yes,
Well, thank you so much. This was
nice to talk to everybody.
I hope people enjoyed the discussion. There was lots covered. So.
We covered a lot, and all of it was related to Silverman, even though we went off on some tangents. So I'm going to click the hang up thing and start up the next one as an after hang. And I hope everybody will come, and I hope that we get new people as well. So thank you again, everybody.